If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
People who've encountered strange, spooky, paranormal, or supernatural things deep in the woods and forests, what's your story?
The rougarou knocked back. I'm really surprised that I haven't listened to many rougarou stories on here. I have two. One is my own personal story. The other is my stepdad's. To preface, the rougarou is a supposedly mythical creature who seeks misbehaving children and Catholics who fail to follow the rules of Lent. I use the term supposedly because I genuinely believe that other creatures exist, such as aliens, Sasquatch, the rougarou, and the Loch Ness Monster. It has the body of a human with the head of a werewolf. I like to picture it as a Sasquatch with a werewolf head. Anyway, on to the stories. Both stories took place in South Louisiana, specifically down the bayou and in the surrounding woods. My story. It becomes scorching down here during the summer. So, to cool off, many of the residents in my town like to enjoy a boat ride down the river for swimming/fishing/tubing at various sandbars. My favorite sandbar was about a 7 to 10 minute boat ride with maybe 30 feet of sand between the river and the woods/swamp. My sister, my mom, my stepdad, and I loaded up in my boat and cruised to the sandbar for a late afternoon catfishing trip. It's usually slap full of boats and people, but it was just us. As the sun is going down, my stepdad is telling his bayou stories and claims he can summon the rougarou. Out of curiosity, my sister and I give him the go-ahead. We were both in our 20s, BTW. He takes a piece of driftwood in each hand and knocks them together twice, making loud, echoing noises. A few seconds go by, and maybe 100 feet into the woods, something knocked back. We noped out of there really quick. I don't think I've ever loaded the boat so quickly before. Never tried to knock for the rougarou again, either. Stepdad's story. Maybe 10 years ago, he was night fishing and set out some jug lines with one of his buddies. While they waited in the dark for the fish to start nibbling on their bait, they started telling their bayou stories. The particular bayou they stopped to wait in wasn't wide at all, maybe 25 feet, with wood/swamp on either side. So, stepdad tells his buddy that if he hollers for the rougarou will holler back. Stepdad then lets out a rah. As soon as he finished his call, maybe 10 feet into the woods, the loudest rah came right back at him. He and his buddy left that bayou so quickly. They went back to the camp and didn't retrieve their jug lines until the following morning. Because of the proximity of the call, the loudness, and the sheer spook factor, stepdad still refuses to go down that particular bayou. Well, those are my stories. I hope y'all enjoyed them. My dad told me a creepy story of when he was hunting. It's not paranormal. He grew up in Colorado and used to hunt up the Tarawera Forest and around Putawaki Mountain. Now it's well known that there are caves up there where old Maori used to lay their dead. A lot of them are not recorded, so if you run into one, it's best to just back out and walk away. This is relevant to the story. Well anyway, at the hunting club there was a story of a giant pig that no one could catch. The area it was known to be was a specific ridge on the mountain. The area was steep and rocky and hard to traverse. This was interesting because the area was pretty overhunted and was basically being cleaned out, with this giant boar being the exception. Hunters would spot it or pick up the trail, and either lose the pig or have the dogs go missing. So the area was considered a bit too risky for losing your dogs. So obviously my dad had to go up there as well and try and get this pig. Well, after a few failed attempts, he gets lucky one day and spots it on a rocky outcrop. It's a huge pig, bigger than anything he's seen. The dogs give chase, and the pig runs up the ridge onto a rocky area. By the time he gets up to the top of the ridge, there's no sign of the pig or the dogs. He called and called them but couldn't find them. Ended up leaving his blanket there in hopes they would find it and went home when it got dark. But he was determined not to end up like others losing their dogs. He took camping gear and stayed on the ridge for the night and day, searching the whole area. Eventually he heard one of the dogs whimpering and followed the sound till he found some thick bushes at the end of a steep downward incline. In the bushes was a big hole, and the dog was at the bottom. It was quite deep, like 4 to 6 meters, so he used a rope to climb down. He grabs the dog and takes it home, the other dog he never found. Now the creepy bit was the bottom of the hole was filled with dog bones and a few human skulls. He thinks it was a burial place. The other creepy part, you may have guessed, is why that pig lived so long. He would lead dogs to that steep trail run towards the hole, which was covered by bushes, and either jump it or step out of the way while the dogs fell in. The amount of dog remains was enough evidence. They never caught that pig either. Met something in the night park. My personal experience after walking in the night park near my old house. It's right on the edge of the city, and while the park looks like about 2 square miles of wild nature, it's surrounded by the city on 3 sides and by suburban areas and a mall on the 4th. Thus, it's not some wild land of Bigfoots, but apparently this place is something. As always, after work I sometimes go to this park at night. The place is safe, with no animals bigger than squirrels, so there's nothing to worry about. This time, I decided to avoid the trails and alleys and instead go to the distant part of the park, where a small stream, about 2 meters wide and shallow, flows at the bottom of a wide ravine, supporting local ponds. Shores are open and have some sticky black clay on them in some parts, and the local village long ago was named Black Mud after this, but in many places, a meter or two from the shore, bushes and trees start. I was going by the shore, the night was clear enough, and there were no trees above the stream, so I could see without a flashlight. Nothing suspicious, only ordinary night forest sounds. Then, I saw some movement behind in the bushes in front of me, where the stream turns from my shore. Here I should add that overall, while I am a bit afraid of darkness, yes, it's a strange combination with night park walks. I got used to the night park and visited it for years, so almost every part is very familiar to me. Besides, it's all surrounded by civilization. So, I saw some movement in those bushes, about 15 meters from me. Slowly, trying not to sound like stepping on some crunchy branch on the shore, I walked forwards. Between the bushes, there was some free space, enough for me to get forward in between. Behind them, there was a small meadow, and then. Here it's hard for me to tell. My mind since then has made me think that I saw a dog, but I can't remember any visual of a dog, no breed, no size, nothing. I do not remember what I saw there, but what I did next was I instinctively rushed backwards to the stream, took from the ground the biggest branch I could see, and ran away from there, looking backwards often, but there was nothing. I stopped only on the hill half a mile away, overlooking the forested ravine bottom around the stream. It was calm and quiet. I finally dropped my stick and, feeling confused, went home. So far I have no idea what it could be, but back then I was like in panic mode for a few minutes, and then it was okay again, like an on/off switch. Never walked near the swamp wasted. So about 3 years ago I was visiting a family member who lived in Celebration, Florida. During the day, I took a walk around the town, and there was a very nice path, definitely not deep wilderness, that wrapped through the swamp. I think technically it was the Everglades, or at least it said it led there. On the opposite side of the path, about 100 yards away, there were lovely houses separated from it by a pond. So fast forward to later that night. I head out to get dinner by myself and end up throwing back a few drinks. So I decide, why not take a walk down the path? So I start walking, enjoying the perfect weather on a beautiful night. I continue down the path and get to what I would say is the most isolated part, but I can still see houses. I began to hear something walking through the tree line 25 feet away from me, and I just kind of got that weird feeling. But it is the swamp at night, so whatever. I continue walking, and I can hear the movement almost as if it were mirroring me walking down the path. I got that weird feeling that something wasn't quite right. So I call a friend from back home to avoid feeling alone. I'm telling him what's going on, and I decide I would just keep going straight, which came out on the opposite side of town, and just take the long way back. So I finally get across a little bridge to a cluster of houses, and boom, no more noise. But now I have no clue how to get back to the house I was staying at. My phone was beginning to get very low on battery, and the cherry on top was that it was 2 days before Halloween, so all the creepy decorations were up, lol. I managed to throw on the GPS, and sure enough, it wants me to get back on the path, albeit way further down, so I figured it would be fine. I'm actually getting the chills just thinking about this. I cross the bridge and begin down the path. I immediately hear something pacing in the woods. At this point I am fully freaked out and just full sprint down the way I know I need to go to get back. And whatever it was is now also sprinting right through the woods alongside me. I am by no means slow, and whatever it was felt it was going stride for stride with me. To get where I needed to go, I had to cross another bridge that was much longer and in full foliage. I get to the other side and no longer hear anything next to me. And it would have been impossible for it to follow, as the bridge was over a gully and some water. Just as I think everything is good, boom, ducking Bambi is on the other side and nearly gives me a heart attack. It was not what was making the previous noise, but man, I had never been so happy to see a deer in my life. My buddy who was on the phone could hear everything and didn't know what to say. I've spent a good amount of time in the actual wilderness, and nothing ever compared to that experience. Needless to say, I never went back on that path. I knew of a man who owned a good bit of land. He would invite along my friend, who was much younger. My friend would hunt one section, and the older guy would hunt the additional acreage across the road. They would meet up afterwards at a Waffle House each time. My friend told me one time he got to the WH, and the man was all shook up. He said he saw something that he didn't want to talk about, but that he told himself if he was able to get back to his truck alive, he would never come back. Sold his rifles, sold his property, and moved. Never would he repeat what he saw. So lately, I've read and seen videos of the Glimmer Man, Cloaked Predator, Shimmer Man, or whatever you want to call it. There is a good eyewitness at the end of Missing 411, The Hunted. Women seem credible. Can anyone share something anonymously that they otherwise would keep to themselves? I used to engage extensively in solo camping and related activities during my tenure with a vegetable cultivation company located in Humboldt County, Northern California. I had probably spent several thousand hours alone in the woods. As someone from the East Coast, I tend to be paranoid. I always take my compound bow. I take my compound bow not for hunting, but in case it is needed. I had no gun license, at the time. That eve I set up a fire and tent under a rocky outcropping. Took a smoke and was chill. At some point I dozed off but was awakened by something moving around on what sounded like two legs. I always have my shit set up for a quick bug out. If necessary, I could leave my sleeping bag and tent and be out in seconds. I lay there for a few minutes, listening to the sounds that were making a wide spiral around my campsite as they gradually got closer. Before I set up, I identified my bug out route, and when the sounds were opposite that route, I grabbed my pack and bow and took off up towards the ridgeline where I could get a better vantage point. I'm sure I was loud. I got up top with the steep incline at my back, so I was reasonably sure nothing could get at me from behind, and I laid flat to get a look at where I had just been. I lay there for several minutes. And I could still see the light from the embers of my fire in the front of my tent. After a few minutes, I watched as some man or other, on 2 feet, walked through my camp between the tent and fire. I contemplated putting an arrow downrange to try and hit it. As this thought went through my head, a 40 to 50 pound, estimated, stone landed about 5 feet from my head. I felt like that was a message. I felt like the entity that tossed that stone was bigger, stronger, and faster, and it was conveying to me that I didn't belong there. If that entity wanted me dead, I would have been killed, and it was clear that there was more than one of them. At that moment, I threw myself down that opposite slope, and as fast as I could, I headed for a Ranger fire watch tower, which I knew was some miles away. In my haste I never found it, lol. Long story short, the rest of the trip was uneventful. Once I got to my home base, I had a great story. While I was in that area, some Native American friends informed me that it is off limits. And I was definitely being told to leave. Spirits of the previous occupants apparently roam the night. Anyway, that's my story. I live in the mountains of western North Carolina and spend a lot of time driving around at night, camping, and just being outside in general, so I've got literal hours of stories that I've witnessed in my 22 years of life, from UFOs, ghosts, shadow people, dismembered hands, ritual sites, government vehicles on abandoned roads, and almost anything and everything creepy possible. But the one that I have absolutely no clue as to what happened was about 8 years ago. I and 3 other of my friends were driving around about 12 to 1 in the morning, pitch black on a road with a few lights and houses on it. It's normally a busy road, and we hadn't seen anyone but one car. Well, we're driving down the road, and another car is coming towards us, and out of nowhere the brightest blue light I've ever seen in my life dropped from the sky. My friend slams on the brakes of her car, our radio goes black, and the thing just hovers for 10 to 15 seconds about 10 feet from the ground. There's a bright white flash, and it shoots up, and it's gone. Nothing to be seen in the sky. The other cars completely stopped too, and we're about 100 yards from each other. We both just start slowly driving away, never knowing what it was. I believe my boyfriend and I may have encountered 2 skinwalkers while fishing near the Missouri River. A few nights ago, my boyfriend and I were riding our 4-wheeler to the river where we typically go fishing, and he chose to lead me along some trails that I had not previously explored. The area is mostly heavily wooded or open fields, so seeing animals like coyotes, deer, and things like that is to be expected. But what we saw off to the side of the trail, crouched down just outside of the tree line in the tall grass and bushes, about 10 to 15 feet from the trail, was something neither of us had seen before. We saw 2 creatures that had big eyes glowing fluorescent green or yellow when the light was shined on them. They also had large ears and pointed dog-like faces, but they were definitely not coyotes. Both of us know what a coyote looks like, and this was not it. They almost looked like hyenas. He was describing the incident to another friend of ours who used to live down in the area we were riding. He was homeless, so he used to camp down there, and he said he saw something similar. We didn't get to see how tall they were because they stayed lying in the grass, but from what his friend said, they would come up to roughly the top of my hips. I'm 5 feet 4 inches half, and they walk on all fours. Has anyone seen anything similar, or does anyone have any ideas as to what it could have been? Appalachian night swim. So for context, I and my boyfriend's family are on vacation at an Airbnb in the mountains in NC. We are from TN, born and raised, so mountains and night adventures are no strangers to us. Tonight, me, my boyfriend, and his sister's husband, were at the hot tub and decided it would be a good idea to take a trip down to the lake. It's about 10:30 p.m. at this point. It's quite a steep walk down to the dock, so we took our rented UTV down to the steps through the forest to get there. As we arrived at the dock, we came down from the second floor to the first floor. The only way out is through the second floor, as there is a bridge connecting to the land there, and peeped over to look at a fish swimming by the ladder. As we congregated, the dock suddenly shook, accompanied by a large bang. Of course we broke into somewhat of a frenzy trying to figure out what the noise was, trying to rule out any possible explanation, weird earthquake, big fish hitting the bottom of the dock, etc. As we did so, we returned to the second floor of the dock, looking around for answers. With the help of our footsteps, we managed to figure out that the only thing able to replicate the sound was us jumping on the second floor. We sort of freaked out after this and quickly made our way back up to the UTV with strange rustling coming from the bushes, sort of like following us? I'm not sure. It was absolutely terrifying and a little inexplicable to us. I don't think it could have been a deer or large animal because it's a little bit of a tighter squeeze across the bridge with the railing. However, for the sound to be possible, whatever it was had to be at least 100 pounds and come onto the second floor without footsteps, unless we just didn't hear them. Additionally, after we arrived at the top and parked the UTV in complete silence and shock, we walked through the front door and were met with extreme concern because everyone had heard screaming coming from outside. What? I don't know, it's just very confusing, and I was worried we were about to get eaten up by a skinwalker or something, but I'm also wondering if there's any kind of paranormal side to it or not. I've never experienced anything like this, and I'm still so shaken up. Does anyone have any ideas? It felt like we weren't welcome in the forest, Skagit. I don't think I've ever felt so certain that a forest was trying to get rid of me before, possibly even kill me. I've always been prone to paranormal experiences growing up. My dad's family has had terrible experiences, but for some reason, my dad was not affected by them except during his time living in the countryside. It is a long weekend for me, so I visited the Skagit River to enjoy some fly fishing. For those of you who don't know, there are still some First Nations people living nearby to this day, and the area has a lot of history. Anyways, I have 2 days left of vacation, so I wanted to do a bit of fishing, then rest on Monday so I had time to rest before the work week. I went with my dad and my girlfriend as a sort of chill trip. No boating required, just waders, boots, and 3 rods. Before we left, I felt uneasy, and upon reviewing the forecast, I discovered a 40% likelihood of thunderstorms in the area, prompting me to immediately cancel the trip. But we had already spent $70 on flies for the Skagit in particular, so we didn't really want to cancel. When we got there, we set up the rods, and as I finished tying on my fly, I heard a loud, deep voice in my ear that sounded a bit like an owl, but more sharp and succinct rather than drawn out like who. It seriously freaked me out, and I wanted to leave right then and there, but we had already spent so much in gas for my truck to get to that part of the river, so I didn't want to call it off. I talked to my dad and girlfriend, and neither of them heard the voice despite it being so loud in my ear. Okay, fine, chalk it up to a coincidence. Then on top of that, we took the wrong trail to get down to the banks of the river and ended up walking about 2 miles into the forest. At this point, we realized we were going the wrong way, but my dad insisted that we should cut through the forest to reach the river and then walk along it to find the car on our way back. It felt like my dad wasn't really thinking straight, or tensions were running higher than usual. My girlfriend didn't have any long sleeves, so I was firmly against it. He went into the middle of the forest to try and find a path while we were still arguing, so my girlfriend and I just sat there on the main trail waiting. While we were waiting, a widowmaker, a large tree limb, fell about 70 feet, and I pulled her out of the way just in time. It probably would have paralyzed her or worse. At this point, I firmly believe we should turn back, so we go back the way we came and find the actual trail to the river, which was only 50 feet in Lowell. We get to fishing, and I'm getting an unnatural amount of snags. The flies for Skagit were relatively more expensive than normal, so I ended up wading into chest-deep water to save the fly. For some reason, everywhere it got snagged had a large drop, meaning if I fell, I would be swept away into the river, possibly drowning or freezing as it was glacier-fed. It just got snagged exactly at a precarious point, and it's hard to tell if there's a drop in running water, let alone still water. It genuinely felt like the forest was trying to bait me or kill me because I didn't listen to it before, not to mention the Widowmaker. So we decided to leave after just an hour of fishing. Although I didn't catch a single fish, I am just grateful to be alive. I do not believe I will ever return there, and distressing events also occurred on my way home, such as feeling as though I was a conduit for negative energy. I don't think it was paranormal, though, but it was honestly traumatizing. I witnessed a motorcycle fatality in real time on the way back. This is probably the worst paranormal experience I've ever had, or it could just be a weird coincidence, but I'll probably be listening to my intuition next time. I've had other experiences before in the forests of BC, but yeah, this was the most explicit warning I've ever been given. One day during firearm season, I was walking up the 2-track road that leads to the trail to my blind. I've been hunting this spot and walking this road since I was about 10 years old. In this story I'm 38. I usually walk in without a light. As I was walking, I felt like I passed the trail, so I turned on my headlamp to find the reflective pin on a tree. Then I turned around and saw probably 6 to 8 pairs of red glowing eyes, about 18 off the ground, staring at me from about 15 feet away. They blinked but otherwise never moved. I was never able to make out what they were, even when I shined my light directly at them. I pulled out my pistol and walked to my blind, but I was completely freaked out. I laugh about it now. And every time I walk past that spot, day or night, I turn and look to where the eyes were. Late in moose season in northern Norway, I was working the trail of a large moose cow with my dog and had been at it for about 4 hours in birch woods up near the tree line in the area I hunt in each year with my hunting party. The weather was miserable, cold, wet, and overall just plain old grim. As I and my dog closed the gap with the cow, we started to find very fresh tracks. Which is generally a good thing. As we were crossing a large stretch of semi-open ground, where a snow avalanche had broken down a lot of trees the previous winter, my dog stopped dead in his tracks about 100 meters in front of me. I figured out he had spotted the moose and waited for me, and then as I got closer to him, I sort of readied myself for hopefully a shot at the moose. This stench hits my nostrils. It reeks of wet dirty wool, carrion, and very musky sweat. The sort of itch you get on hunting dogs who have worked really hard all day. I bent down to put the leash on my dog, just in case, and slid around into the chamber of my rifle when I got this really foreboding feeling of being somewhere I don't belong. The woods were dead quiet, with the exception of the wind and the panting of my dog, who was getting a bit restless. The smell kept getting stronger and stronger, and it was so bad I almost started gagging when I heard these low guttural sounds coming from a thicket of trees about 50-ish meters to my far left. I pulled my dog along and turned back and walked as calmly as I could while keeping a firm hold of my rifle. I radioed the rest of the hunting party and told them I had lost the track and was retracing my steps for a bit, but in reality, I wanted as much ground as possible between me and whatever was giving off that smell. Been hunting for 25 plus years and never smelled anything like it. Have made a point of avoiding the tract of land ever since. What did I witness in our woods? A shapeshifter? I own a piece of raw land with an RV located in the western Catskills, New York, and my property is situated at the end of a private grassy and gravel road that is predominantly wooded. I come up here on the weekends with my dog. My acreage is sandwiched in by 2 large forested raw parcels, and across the road is a 20-acre property owned by a brother and sister who live in Maine and are never there. The back of my property looks over one of several pastures of the neighboring 300-acre farm. So basically it's just me and the dog when I go up on weekends. On the north side of my property is a 40 feet wide right-of-way for utility poles, so I have a long trail loop I can use when I walk the dog that pops me back up to where the road officially ends. My boy always wants to go investigate the Maine-owned property across the road, but I don't want them to think I'm being nosy if they have cameras, so I keep him on a leash. The road we share has our ferned and forested woods. So you can see through the bottom part of the trees on either side. That's the layout of my morning walk down my property and back up to the grassy path/road. So I was taking the boy up the side of the property to the road, and I turned the corner, and as I passed the neighbor's grassy driveway, I saw a huge black figure about 100 feet away in the ferns, human-sized, almost looking like a black cloak. I thought I saw a small head or something that made me stop because I saw movement, but in an instant it hunched over and seemed to collapse into itself, and as it caved to half its size, the black figure spread the largest black wings I've ever seen and flew up. My dog didn't hear it or see it. It made no noise. When it hunched down and launched itself, I whispered, "What the duck is that?" It wasn't a turkey vulture, think bigger. Like big Andean condors. But it was entirely black and not a raven. Not even close. My eyes followed it up through the trees once it launched itself because I had to see what the hell that big thing with wings was. And as it went up through the trees, it disappeared for literally just a second and then casually flew right over my head. I would say it was about 80 to 100 feet over my head. What did I see above me? A basic crow. A normal-sized crow. There's no way what I saw on the ground spreading its wings was just a normal-sized crow. There are crows all around, I know their size. I'm a birder and build things. I know scale. It wasn't a raven, and I have a couple I hear around, so I know the difference between the two. This thing was human-sized when I walked up, and it stopped me in my tracks. The wingspan of the creature was at least 5 feet on each side. As the normal-sized crow flew over my head, I thought, no way. That's not it. And I said, I saw that, I see you. The things you see in the woods. First of all, let me start off by saying that this story is from almost 30 years ago when I was a kid. I've told very few people the story due to not feeling like anyone would believe me. Like many kids in the 90s, I was hanging out over a weekend with a close friend of mine and staying at his house with him and his family. We lived in rural VA, and he lived in a small town like I did. We spent a lot of time riding four-wheelers and exploring the nearby woods that were across a soybean field. One weekend, I was visiting, and it snowed an average amount for VA, 4 to 6 inches or so. We were beyond excited to take the four-wheelers out to the field and tear it up for a while. After we were bored of that, we parked at the edge of the woods and walked in a ways. Now, we had been in these woods quite a bit and had seen a lot of things. There was a lot of old equipment and even old rusted-out cars spread throughout an area of the forest. Being teenagers, we thought this was really cool and would often go check these out. That day we decided that we were going to start building a fort of sorts back near the debris. I often carried a small hatchet on me when we were riding trails in case a smaller tree had fallen across the trail. I walked back to the four-wheeler and got it and started to chop down a smaller tree to use as the base of a wall. For the life of me, I could not find another tree of the right size after that one was placed, so I started walking around the area without my friend. It was then that I stumbled upon a rotting deer carcass. This didn't bother me growing up in rural Virginia. Friends and family were hunters, and I had eaten my fair share of venison in my life. However, I noticed that the deer had what appeared to be claw marks on it. Was this prey for another animal that didn't stick around for its meal? What animals that could catch a deer were even out in this forest? I went to get my friend to show him the carcass. He was as puzzled as me, but we just kind of let it be. I returned to building our fort. As I was using some rope to tie two of the smaller trees together, something caught my eye about 50 yards away. What I saw was just the silhouette of a person. However, it was rounded off and blurry, almost like what you would see in a comic book or video game indicating an unknown character. Startled, I simply yelled "Hey!" at it. At that moment, the figure darted behind a tree. I'm now acutely aware that we are not alone. I yelled for my friend, and he came walking over. I let him know what I just saw, and he laughs it off. As he's laughing, I stand up from my squatting position and see this same shadow over his shoulder no more than 10 yards away. I scream, "Oh shit!" and immediately take off running for the field as I yell at him to follow. I hear him following me as his footsteps grow closer. Then I hear his footsteps grow farther away. I turn and look, and he has split off onto a different path. At that moment, I was indifferent and continued running until I reached a large ditch that was approximately 5 feet deep. I just jumped across it in a panic. I later discovered how far a jump that was, and I have no idea how I cleared it. As I reach the field and get out of the woods, I see my friend standing about 30 yards down the line of the woods, hunched over and breathing heavily. I check behind me and see nothing as I start to walk towards him. I ask, "You saw that, right?" To which he responds, "Why do you think I'm out of breath?" We jump on the four-wheelers and head back towards his house, not saying a word. When we got back, I asked him what he saw because I wanted to know if it was the same thing I saw. He described it perfectly. We tried to talk to his parents, but they both just laughed it off and said, "Guess you better stay out of those woods." He had the idea to go talk to his grandmother, who lived a couple blocks away and had lived in town her whole life. We simply asked her if she had ever heard anything strange about the woods over there. She then began to tell us about an old sawmill that had exploded back in her time. She said how much of a tragedy it was at the time and that nearly everyone had lost their life. This explained the old equipment. This explained the old cars rusting out. They had cleaned up the dangerous parts of the accident and left the rest untouched. We then told her our story, to which she smiled and told us how people don't realize that we aren't alone in the world. Absolutely horrified at this point, we left. Neither one of us has ever returned to those woods. My hand axe is still sitting back there. I had terrible dreams for years about this incident and still, 30-ish years later, have a random dream about the incident. I don't know what we ran into that day, and I'm certainly not going back to check. 2 experiences come to mind. The first one was closer to 10 years ago now. A friend and I were fox hunting around 1 a.m. on a cloudy night with lightning in the distance. We were calling, and all of a sudden, off in the distance, there was this ball of light moving across the horizon at a decent speed. My buddy thought it was aliens lol. I thought it was a helicopter with a spotlight. Now that I'm older and have more experience, it was without a doubt ball lightning moving across power lines. Really cool. I've seen it 3 times now. Second thing. While I was in college, I was deer hunting about 3 or so miles off a road that's 20 miles from nowhere in far northern California by myself. I know the area very well. The sun had set, and it was dark with a bright half moon, so I followed the well-established trail that goes along a steep ridge line with no light. About a mile from my truck, all the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I had that feeling I was being watched. I stopped and listened. Lots of mountain lions and bears in this area, turned my headlamp on, and looked around but didn't see anything. I continued on, and about 30 yards ahead of me, just off the side of the trail, I saw a largish black form. I figured it was a bear, so I unslung my rifle and held it at my hip while holding a streamlight flashlight. There was nothing. Continued on. A few minutes pass, and I hear a twig snap behind me. Now I'm nervous. I draw a 9mm that has a WML, nothing. The rest of the walk back I hear twigs snap occasionally, but no eyes reflect back at me. Got back to the truck, turned the headlights on, and saw nothing. I was admittedly spooked. I've hunted that area many times since and never saw anything like it. $20 says it was a curious, young mountain lion. They are everywhere in Northern California and really not that dangerous, not Sasquatch. If he's out there, I'm confident I would have seen him by now. I've seen other really weird stuff out in the woods, but all of it is explainable by either human activity, seriously, people are weird, or animals doing their thing. The time I heard the witch's laughter. For context, this took place when I was in 4th, 5th grade. I remember it was summer, and like most kids, I went outside during the days and wandered the streets and woods with neighborhood friends. Behind our street was a strip of power lines that I wasn't allowed back into. A few summers prior, a tick had given me Lyme disease, and I spent a few days in the hospital. So it's understandable why my parents wouldn't want me walking in tall grassy parts of the woods or climbing trees anymore. One of these days that summer, my 2 friends and I were walking in the neighborhood when someone came up with the idea to go into the power lines and explore. As we turned right off the street and began walking into the woods, I started to feel hesitant. I was apprehensive about getting into trouble with my parents, but once I voiced my concerns, they encouraged me to stay behind if I so desired, and we continued our journey. Everything up to this point is normal. About 20 seconds go by, and I'm standing by myself in about 100 yards of woods between the power lines and the road. This is where things take a turn. In bright daylight, I start hearing music like staticky radio music I've never heard before. This wasn't like an ordinary radio song by Kesha or Rihanna back in the early 2010s. It was instrumental and repetitive, if that makes any sense. I quickly wrote it off as a car going by, but the music was not moving from the source like a moving car would as it drove down the street. I also knew no car would be parked on that part of the road, as it was quite busy, and I would have seen it through the brush. It sounded like a radio just sitting there in the woods out of sight. Then it got worse. I began to hear children's laughter over the music of the radio. It was getting louder. All this happened in seconds. I looked in all directions. I saw nothing but woods, the road, and power lines, and I could see through the brush about 40 yards in each direction. My friends were only about 200 yards away, but they were out of sight. Then I start hearing her voice. Plain as day. The voice seems to come from all directions, as if it were inside my head. She tells me to come to her in a creepy tone. Come, my sweet little boy, come over to me, or something along those lines. She was beckoning me. Trying to lure me in like a child from Hansel and Gretel. I remember trying to tell myself this is in my head while still grasping what is happening. This made no sense in the moment. I remember still looking around and seeing nobody. There is no source of the music or laughter or voices that are plain as day. Then I start hearing footsteps behind me. Getting closer. Again, a plain day. I still hear the crunching of the leaves below her feet. I never saw anything, however, fight or flight kicked in, and I ran to my friends. As fast as possible. Not 10 seconds later, I catch them in my line of sight, walking as if they were just chatting. I was shaking as I caught up to them. I thought they could have been messing with me. But nothing adds up, maybe the speaker in the woods. But the footsteps were with no one there, and the voice was in all directions. This story is not something I made up. This was not a dream. I spoke to my friend years later, and she remembered me catching up to them. This was by far the scariest experience I can recall. I saw a shadowy figure run by in the woods. This happened years ago when I was about 12 to 13. I was at my Girl Scout camp, where we were sleeping in cabins. Sometimes on the camping trips we would go on, I would get homesick and leave at night. That's what happened this time. When my dad came to pick me up around 1 a.m., the leader accompanying me instructed me to grab my dishes from outside. They were in a cloth bag on a clothesline like everyone else's, but it was kind of downhill from where they were standing. Anyway, I go outside, and as I'm about to grab my dishes, I see a human-like shadow figure run through the woods. I ran back to my dad and the leader and told them what I saw. They said it was probably just an animal. It was not. I was so freaked out that I didn't even look at the woods when I ran to get my dishes. My dad suggested it could have been someone going for a run, but at 1 a.m.? Not to mention we were in a pretty rural area, not the place where people would be running in the woods alone at night. I don't know, man. Does anyone have any idea what this was? Approximately in October of the previous year, I was in the mountains behind my residence, strolling and listening to music through my headphones. I was near the top of the ridge when I thought I heard a noise, so I took my headphones off. There was a low whistling noise, kind of like a person whistling to a song but very eerie. I kind of crouched down because I didn't know if it was a person, but the whistle started to move as if the person whistling started to walk, but there were no footsteps or noise at all. Mind you, it was October, so the ground was covered in dry leaves, and it eventually got closer and closer to the point that I lay all the way down behind a bush. I was low-key trespassing, so I didn't know whether I was going to get shot or not if it was a person lol, but it eventually passed by me and got further and further away until I couldn't hear it. The only part that gets me is the fact that there were no footsteps in the leaves. What do we think? Did we avoid a Wendigo or a skinwalker? My boyfriend, best friend, and I are from a tiny town in Pennsylvania. We were invited to spend a week with our best friend's grandparents in Michigan, who live in the forest. There are trails that stretch for miles and a giant lake in the middle of it where we have only seen swans chilling. The main issue in these forests is ticks, isn't it? We arrived in Michigan on Saturday. Today is Thursday, and last night, Wednesday night, around 1 a.m., my boyfriend, Z, my best friend, B, and I were smoking a joint in front of the forest near the trail entrance. We wanted to stargaze and watch deer, plus we weren't allowed to smoke on B's grandparents' property. During the beginning of us setting up, the wind was blowing against our backs as we faced the forest. We were joking around, trying to smoke while shivering, and just having a nice conversation while standing around. We stood in a diagonal line and heard rustling. I jokingly said, "What if it's a skinwalker?" Our senses were heightened because we didn't want B's grandparents to know we left in the middle of the night. B's grandparents are old and traditional, so when they are unsure if we are home, they will repeatedly text B asking for his whereabouts. After B checked his phone over 10 times, he and I heard a female voice coming from the direction of their house. We were about 200 feet away from the property. B heard his grandmother's voice clearly. She was obviously calling out our names in order. B, M, Z. Come inside. This was unusual, because before we left the house, all the lights were off, and they were asleep by that time. We made sure. After the voice cut off, we heard more very loud rustling in the woods right in front of us. Like 10 featuring, and it sounded like heavy footsteps trampling through the brush. We were silent for a couple minutes, listening to the sounds of the dead leaves being crunched, and it sounded like someone was trying to watch us through the trees. The sound was louder than any noise a deer or a bear would make. There were no noises, growling, or anything. Just the instance of something large walking around. The wind changed direction completely, now blowing against us instead of from behind. It was now blowing against the front of us instead of our backs. He immediately turned his phone flashlight on and yelled, "Hey!" about 3 times. During the yelling and pauses, the footsteps quickened and seemed hesitant to leave the area in front of us. It sounded like 2 feet, not 4, like an animal, and it started to run toward the lake. Before this, I should mention that the sounds of the swans honking were nice and peaceful. Then, when the entity or whatever it was began to run away scared, the swans were shouting and yelling. They were absolutely going crazy. The lake was far from us, and the water level had fallen. Bushes and random trees obstructed the path to the water, but when the entity ran towards the lake, we heard splashing as if it were right next to us. It was that loud. The sound was so loud that we could hear each individual trudge through the water. Our fight or flight kicked in, and we all kept our flashlights on towards the forest. I checked behind us, opened all the car doors so we could dart in if needed, and kept talking at a loud volume to keep whatever it was away. Once they were in the water, the swans were screaming and seemed to leave. The sounds of trudging through water died quickly, and everything was silent again. We left immediately and went home. All of us were quiet and exhausted. It was like we didn't even get the effect of THC because of how scared we felt. What the duck was that? About 11 years ago when I was 16, my family and friends went on an ATV trip to the Northwoods in Wisconsin, somewhere in Iron County, Wisconsin. We went on yearly trips where we would ride all day but head back to the same camp at night. This particular trip was our first time in the area, so we found a good-looking campground, made camp, then went riding. The trails in this area were not all too exciting, gravel logging roads that stretched miles with no one on them, so we cut the day short, headed back to camp, and decided we would pack up camp and move the next morning to a campground with better trails. Night came, and my dad and stepmother slept in a small cabin, while my two friends, my stepbrother, and I slept in a tent. It had been dark for a while, and we weren't getting any sleep, so we decided to take a walk around the campsite. The campground was almost at capacity, but no one was out at their fires, and it seemed like everyone was asleep. We walked the entire campground and were almost back to our tent, and we decided to stop and stare at the stars. We are from the Chicagoland area and have a lot of light pollution, so the stars that far north are very impressive. As we sat there pointing at the stars and constellations with our low-quality flashlights, I noticed a satellite slowly moving across the sky. It was moving in a straight path across the sky, and I pointed it out and followed it with a flashlight until everyone saw it. It reached the center of the sky with its path when suddenly a large white light illuminated me and the three others. We stood there, still staring up at the sky in awe of what was happening. I don't remember any of us talking or questioning the light, and I also can't tell exactly how much time passed underneath the light. When the light stopped shining, and our eyes were still towards the sky, we saw the same satellite dart across the sky in its same path, stress on the word dart, as the object moved about 10 times faster than before when I first noticed it. All four of us looked at each other, shocked at what just happened, and immediately went back to camp. We talked about what it could have been and what could have happened but never came to any conclusion other than it being a UFO. The next day we told my parents about the encounter and moved on to the next campsite, business as usual. For a few years I completely forgot about the event, which is strange in its own sense. However, to this day all four of us remember the strange encounter with the bright light. Last fall while elk hunting, my son and his wife went up one ridge, while I by myself went up a ridge across to the west of them. We were probably a mile or more apart in heavy timber. I got to the top, where I could see a ways, where it had logged a few years ago. I'm sitting in a good spot where I can see down both sides and along the ridge. I'd been there for maybe half an hour when I heard 3 loud knocks that echoed down the mountain to the southeast. Didn't really think much of it. Then after another 10 minutes, there are 3 more knocks, this time closer. Now I'm wondering what it could be. After about 5 more minutes and 3 more knocks, this time they are close, just out of sight. I'm like, what in the hell? The hairs on my arms are standing on end. When all of a sudden I hear voices. I can't make out what they are saying, but there's more than one person talking. They are getting a bit closer, and I still can't see anything. They are maybe 100 yards or so down the hill. I could now hear a little better, but it sounds like a foreign language or something. It sounded like coughs, snorts, and grunts mixed with some sort of language. Now I'm on my feet looking to see what's down there. It's starting to get dusk, and the light is dimming slowly. I see some movement to the south on the ridge. And there I was watching a larger dark hair-covered figure crossing the ridge. It was huge on 2 legs and moving at a good pace. Its head is set low on its neck with the chin down near its chest. There was no hair around the eyes and nose. The nose was like ours, it didn't stick out far but was big. The arms were long, like to the knees long. The shoulders were wide, I'd guess between 3.5 and 4 feet across. The hair was probably 6 to 8 inches long and dark. I'd guess this thing to be between 8 and 10 feet tall. I put my scope on it before it disappeared. I could see the muscles in its legs and back moving. I just couldn't shoot, it just looked too damn human. I never saw the other one, but I believe it was watching me. I heard movement a few times as I made my way back to the rig. Then I had to wait in the dark for what seemed like forever before my boy got to the rig. They heard the knocks but couldn't tell what it was. We went back the next morning and couldn't find anything other than the sign of something heavy going through. This wasn't my first rodeo where Sasquatch is concerned. I saw one back in the early 80s from several hundred yards. And my wife and I had one run across the road in front of us in a snowstorm back in the mid-80s. It was white with a pinkish red face. but this time I heard them talking. I wish I would have gotten this on camera. I've never heard anything like that before. But I was on YouTube one day and found a recording from California that was very similar sounding. Have had trail cameras set up in the area since the snow came off, but nothing yet. Small rural town that resonated really badly with me. Hopefully some of you find this intriguing. Personally, I will never forget it. For a little background, I was 18 at the time and had been on a bushwalking road trip with my dad in the NSW Outback. I was set to meet with my brother, 21, and a mutual friend in a small rural town to go vermin shooting on a huge outback property. I had been in the Army Reserve for more than a year and a member of the Scout movement for more than 5 years. I spent a lot of time, and still do, hiking and camping solo and really enjoyed the solitude of the Australian bush. I provide this context to highlight that I was well experienced and comfortable with being in remote and desolate locations. So after my dad dropped me off at my friend's place and my brother arrived, we piled into our friend's car and headed into the outback as night fell. After several hours we arrived at our destination and walked into the dark to hunt with. We carried a shotgun, .243, and 222s. We set up a basic camp before sunrise and slept until about midday, then went back out for another night of shooting. On the third night we only stayed out for a few hours. Over the whole 2 days, we did not see another soul. I feel this is important to mention because what happened to me next had nothing to do with the remoteness or bush setting. On the last morning after packing up camp, our friend wanted to visit a small town nearby where there was a natural hot spring pool to soak in before the drive home. This sounded like a fantastic idea, so we went. As we drove into the small town, I sensed what I recall as a hissing or buzzing sound that gave me intense goosebumps and shivers. I thought it was a fleeting moment, but the feeling persisted and grew stronger. It was a horribly oppressive feeling that I did not know how to handle. My brother and friend exited and entered the pool, but I was unable to bring myself to participate, instead spending the next 20 to 30 minutes feeling as though I was about to vomit, a sensation I rarely experience. I didn't know how to communicate my feelings to the other two, so I did not say anything. We jumped back into the car and drove back the way we came, and the feeling subsided. It was a little while later that I realized I felt okay and was able to relax a little, but I remember being confused and feeling weird for the next few hours. I have heard about times when a person or place didn't resonate, and that is exactly what this was. It was more than a feeling of discomfort, more like a feeling of dread and danger, but I was the only one of us who felt it. I spoke to my brother years later about it, and he only vaguely recalled the visit to the town and pool at all but remembers the camping and hiking part vividly. I have never been back to that small town but often think about it and wonder whether it would have the same effect now. I trespassed in an ancient forest, and odd things happened. I have been training for long-distance hiking for the past few months. Since I can't drive, I usually hike in the local area, but I have grown quite bored of it now. I also struggle with reading maps, and having been doing this solo, I am confident in my ability to take care of myself independently. On my usual trek last Monday, I lost my way a few times and ended up on private land. When I noticed, I just backtracked. No issues. This happened 3 times on this particular walk, which had added an extra 10 miles. I was heading back home using my usual route, which I had taken countless times, when I twisted my ankle. I knew if I went my usual way it would be an extra 6 miles, which I didn't really want to do. So I looked at my map and saw a private route that cut right through a forest. I'm normally a rule follower, but I knew I couldn't make it the other way. So I trespassed. This route would be 3 miles shorter. I started down the path, all was well the first half mile. There was a stream with a waterfall, which was all quite pleasant despite the fact I was dragging my leg. Then I noticed the forest was getting very dense, and the trees were bigger than ones I'd seen in the other forest I passed through. This really surprised me since I joke with my friends about all trees looking the same, but the trunks on these trees were the biggest I've ever seen, with bases the size of small houses. The trees looked like something out of a fairy tale. Further down the path I noticed that there are suddenly more bluebells than I've ever seen surrounding everything. This went on for about a mile, then I noticed random 3 feet tall stones that looked purposeful and very old. I'm used to seeing old stone markers, but something about the shapes was odd. Markers? Graves? I'm unsure. I had seen animals all the way through my hike, but not here, nothing, it was silent. I stopped to take a picture of the bluebells, and then what looked like a leg suddenly came out of the grass near the base of a tree. I jumped out of my skin. I am miles away from anyone, on land where I should not be, and I have no signal on my phone. I thought it might have been a bloating body, which made the leg suddenly pop up. I got myself together and took a few deep breaths and went to check. I walked over, and it was just a solid log. I swear to God. I saw it come up out of the grass near the tree, but it was a log. WTF. I keep on walking but quicken my pace. My ankle is ducking, killing me. Then I heard a door slam. There are no buildings here. Maybe it's just a tree? I'm trying to be rational. What happened next really ducked me up. I heard someone speak. But it was right next to my ear. I could feel the warmth of their breath. Leave here. I turn around, but there is no one there at all. There is nothing. There is no way someone could sneak off and run away. I break out into a full-on sprint, duck my ankle. I need to get out of here now. I reach the end of the path, and it's a 15-foot tall chain gate. There is no way I'm heading back down that trail. I find that the top of one of the walls is broken, making it about 10 feet, so I haul my 5-foot tall ass over it and just sit by the side of the road. I look back through the gate, waiting for someone or something to appear. Nothing happened. It's been over a week, and I need to go back. Despite my reluctance, I feel obligated to return. I understand I might have been a tad dehydrated, but I've been doing this for months, and nothing like this has happened. This is in England. There were no buildings or residents on the land. Catskill's camping story. 2 of my friends and I were camping in an off-trail campsite in the Slide Mountain Wilderness area of the Catskill Mountains. We were not very far from the parking lot and only had a 3-person tent as well as a few extra bags of supplies. All of the food we used we put back in the car. Right before I drifted off to sleep, I'd say around 11:12ish, I began to hear something moving around the campsite and the general area we were located in. At first I heard it distantly. If I had to estimate, I would say roughly 30 yards from our tent. Occasionally it would move in closer and then get further away again. It ended up brushing past the tent inches from my face at a pace that felt like a run. I was half asleep and assumed that the sound was caused by an animal that was highly nocturnal and scampering around. I ended up going to sleep and woke up some time later in the night to still hear the footsteps very close to our campsite. After about 15 minutes of lying awake listening, I heard it brush past our tent again at a pace that was once again similar to a run. That's when I realized that whatever it was 100% moving on 2 legs. Besides the pattern of the footsteps, they were clean, and there wasn't as much foliage movement and shuffling compared to other animals. Yes, it was definitely moving on 2 legs and being person-like. My other friend ended up hearing it too, and we discussed a few possibilities that still left us really confused. Obviously we thought it was a person at first. Whoever it was definitely knew we were there, and if they were some type of serial killer, we would have been dead already. We considered the possibility that it was just a freak looking to scare a bunch of kids, as well as someone who was lost in the woods and wasn't able to ask for help. However, there were many things that didn't add up. If it was someone looking to freak us out, we assumed that they would be more forward in their efforts to do so, making weird noises, spending more time around our tent, etc. The theory that someone was lost didn't make any sense either, because the trail that we were camping on is extremely popular for hikers in the daytime, and your odds of finding your way back are arguably really good. Other peculiarities included the absence of any flashlight or headlamp on the person or object in question. The moon was out, but the woods were dark, and any regular person would 100% need a light source to move around as effectively as whatever was out there was moving around. The pattern of the footsteps indicated that whatever it was moving faster than a regular walking pace, and mind you, I was hearing this going on from roughly before midnight to right before first light. It was all very inhumane. If anyone has any idea what it could have been, please let me know. I was hiking last night, around 11 p.m. This is in northern New Mexico, a place where I frequently, every other weekend or so, for the past few months, hike and backpack. I was returning from an approximately 8-mile, out and back trail. About halfway down, I started getting a whiff of hot electronics. You know when a computer gets too hot, or you turn the furnace on for the first time in a while? That. It got more and more pungent the further I walked. I thought it was weird, but nothing to be concerned about. The wilderness smells bad sometimes. What caused me to sprint back and throw caution to the wind was this unshakable feeling of being unwelcome. It just hit me so suddenly and violently, it was like I was having a physical reaction to this emotion. I tried to be calm for a bit, convincing myself it was nothing. It kept getting worse, and no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was right behind me on the trail or that something wanted me out. It was a terrible, paralyzing feeling. Like that kind of fear that makes you want to stand completely still, be completely quiet, and try to hide. I had been calling out and playing music as usual, just to let any critters know I was in the area and not spook any bears. I have an incredibly bright light that I was using to look around for any signs of anything. Owls staring, cougars stalking, something. I was entirely alone, from what I could tell. I made it back to the trailhead, and the feeling subsided, but the smell was still present in my nostrils. Recounting it still makes me feel queasy. Never have I had this feeling or experienced anything like it. I have never been very spiritual, superstitious, or religious, but whatever was up there had me reciting prayers I haven't spoken since Sunday school. I'm a big dude. 6 feet 4 inches, 275 pounds. I'm not easily frightened, and I certainly didn't flee. I was truly terrified. I'm curious if anyone has any insights, advice, or similar experiences to share. I don't mind if it's a commonplace or an entirely rational explanation. Actually, I prefer it that way. Thank you. Back in 2020, I was 13 at that time and was on vacation. I was residing at my cousin's residence, where the backyard is densely populated with mango trees. Not far from these trees lies a private property. More like a grass field but has a lot of tall bushes and a lake. We were playing that time with my cousin, and we rode bicycles until we reached the private property. We basically trespassed in it because there were no fences or gates, and that place was a perfect place to play. When we got there, I suddenly felt uneasy but just brushed it off and continued to play until I saw a tall black shadow figure standing from afar under the mango tree. My cousin also saw one not far from the one I saw. We weren't scared that time because we wanted them to play with us. When I was young, my parents always said that I had an imaginary friend, I could talk to some spirits, and I could see one. When we got home, we noticed that the figure followed us, but we didn't think much about it since we believed it was our friend. Days passed, and we still played with them. We even talked to them, and occasionally they often stood beside our bed watching us sleep. It was just fine, but one night, when I was throwing the trash outside, I saw another figure, and it scared me because it was so creepy and much taller than the previous one we've seen. So I hurriedly go back inside and tell my cousin about it. Little did I know that that was the night that would start to turn my world upside down. I noticed that my cousin was acting different and started persuading me to come with her and attempt to end ourselves, and yes, we did attempt to kill ourselves on that night. We sneak outside and start tying a rope on the mango tree to hang ourselves, but we didn't succeed because the dog almost bit us, and the dog was also acting strange. We decided to go to the highway and just let a truck hit us, but I hesitated because I was scared because from the other side of the road, I saw the creepy tall figure that scared me. But before I can say a word to my cousin, she already pulls me, which results in us crashing with the truck. Before losing consciousness, I see the tall figure that we considered as friends standing from afar, looking at me. When I regained consciousness, I was already at the hospital and waiting for a surgery to be taken. I was expecting that the tall shadow figure would show up when I woke up, but strangely, it didn't appear until now that I'm already 17. Until today, I have been wondering why we did that and what the connection is to the tall shadow figure I saw. The car graveyard and other odd things on my family's land. I was a child of divorce and, as such, was often taken by my dad on weekends when I was a kid. He spent most of that time waxing his car at my grandparents' house, who lived out in nowhere, NC, since he lived in a condo with no hoses to wash his precious. Ignored, my brother and I were typically left to our own devices and wandered the fields and woods around my granddad's land, which was about a half-hour drive from civilization. My family owned the neighboring homes and great swatches of land between and behind the houses, so we could pretty much explore out there for hours. All this said, there were some really odd things that happened there, and I think they're either too absurd or too subtle to have been my childhood imagination. You can decide for yourselves, though, and I'd love to hear what you guys think might have been going on. Here are some things I remember. My great-uncle was a kind of jack of all trades, and he bought/sold used cars. He also bought wrecks to strip and scrap, dumping the useless husks in a field/the woods up a trail behind his house. My brother and I called this place the car graveyard. On its own it was eerie, with cars all the way back from the 50s in various states of disrepair. I used to climb inside them. Until I got into one that was tacky with what might have been dried blood. Sometimes I'd find bones out there, mostly deer, but they'd be in odd places, like skulls on car hoods. My guess is it was just poachers on his land messing around because he didn't hunt, but who knows? Never saw any with skin/fur. One day, my brother and I were going to the car graveyard, but up the trail to it, we started to hear what sounded like pain moaning up ahead, where the derelicts were. We turned tail that day. Oddest, perhaps, from the car graveyard was the one time we actually went really far back to see just how deep the cars went. It continued into the woods for a while, with trees sometimes growing right out of the wrecks. My brother and I saw something ahead that looked like fog or mist, and we didn't think much of it because we were kids, but this was mid-afternoon and only in one area. We passed on through and felt inexplicably weird and decided to give up on seeing how far back it went. When we got back to my granddad's place, things still seemed off. It was hard to explain, like my dad looked like my dad and acted like him, but he didn't feel the same. My brother felt this same dissonance too, and we got this wild idea that when we crossed the fog, we somehow stepped into another dimension, maybe just slightly different from our own. Maybe it was just stupid kid stuff, but I still remember how oppressive this feeling of not belonging was. We booked it back and crossed the fog again, feeling immediately at ease. Went back as an adult to that same spot. No fog, but there was a particularly off-putting sensation. That's a less interesting tale, though. A few other odd things that happened out there but not in the graveyard. Heard laughter coming from a hole in the woods. Swore I saw a stereotypical sheet ghost near the woods, and they vanished. I regularly saw a face in the shadows between the trees across the field. Reminded me of a Morlock from the 60s time machine. Saw a log truck carrying a bear on its back that was as tall as a house. It was probably some fiberglass thing for a store or putt-putt golf, but it was an odd thing to see. I hesitate to add this one because it's so goofy, but what the heck. One day my brother and I were messing with my granddad's walkie-talkies, and we saw an odd-looking bird in the sky. We joked that it looked like a flying monkey from The Wizard of Oz and said, flying monkey, come in flying monkey. Into the talkies. Another voice came through and said, someone get me a flying banana. Feeling a bit spooked, we went into the kitchen, took a banana to leave outside, and then stayed indoors for the rest of our visit. When we left, only the peel was sitting outside. That's all the information I have about that area. Feel free to ask any questions too. I had this experience happen to me a few years back and would love to hear what people think of it. I have spoken to a few other witnesses from that night, and none of them know what it could be. To give a little background, I served with the Canadian Forces for a short period of 3 years. I would prefer not to get any more specific than that, but I was in a combat arms trade and was never deployed overseas. We spent a week conducting a routine exercise, during which we remained mostly stationary in one position. For what I did, we would typically deploy in open areas, preferably close to a tree line so we could hide most of our vehicles and equipment. We always have sentries out around the perimeter to ensure that other units don't accidentally drive through our lines at night and to practice local defense and all that good stuff. It was myself and another woman in my unit. The end of our shift was coming upon us, and I got up to go wake up the next 2 guys that would be relieving us. It was pretty dark and quiet. I woke them up and started making my way back to our sentry post while they were getting dressed, and about halfway back to the position, a white light quickly flashed. I could literally see everything as clear as day. All the vehicles, all the tents, all the equipment, everything. The only way I could describe it is as if someone just flipped a switch and turned on all the lights. And then it was gone. It was just a quick flash, but I've never seen anything like that before. I've worked with plenty of military tech, and while a flare is pretty damn bright, it was nothing like that. You would see the trace of it burning in the sky, not to mention an origin point of the light. There was none as far as I could tell with this flash. It didn't appear to be coming from anywhere. It was just all of a sudden as light as day and then back to night. The girl I was on sentry with witnessed it, and the next day I also asked around, and the only other person who was also outside at the time was a sergeant who also witnessed it. He informed me that in his career he has never witnessed anything like that before, and no one I mentioned it to seemed to have any explanation. What do you guys think it could have been? I wasn't also aware of any other units on exercise that night, but I could be wrong, but even if they were, there's no flare that bright, and it was silent. I didn't hear a thing, it just flashed and then was gone. I should also add, while I guess it's kind of obvious, just to be safe, it's in a pretty isolated training area. The base itself is in a small military town about 2 hours away from any kind of city, and it's located pretty close to a rather large provincial park. So it's safe to say we were pretty far into the bush. I'm sure at this point any CF member can take a good guess where I'm referring to. I believe I encountered a monster in the woods, and the thought scares me to this day. This happened when I was in middle school. I'm about to graduate high school. I still remember every detail to this day. When I was younger, my mother sent my siblings and me to this cute little summer camp in the mountains. The camp lasted for 1 week in a remote location. No cell service, no quick way to reach anyone, and we were miles and miles away from the nearest town. This happened in my 3rd year in attendance. The way these campsites were set up goes as follows: you were split by gender and age group. Each campsite had 4 cabins with 5 raised beds in each and 1 lean-to, or however you spell it, I don't know, for the assigned camp counselor. So in your cabin you've got 4 buddies that you get to know fairly well throughout the week. There are also no bathrooms at the campsites, so if you had to go, you would need to get the TP from your counselor and go in the woods. We were about 12 at the time, so we always went with a buddy. This one night a girl in my cabin, who I had become pretty close with throughout the week, was just talking with me in the dark of our cabin about absolutely nothing. Just two kids who couldn't sleep, so we opted to stay up and talk until we could. Well, eventually she tells me she has to go to the bathroom and asks if I'll go with her. I say, yeah, no biggie. So we grab our flashlights and sandals and hike over to get some TP and then go back past our cabin. Ours was the furthest out, on the edge of our campsite and a good 20 feet from the other cabins, a little ways into the woods. I stand on the path while she goes up into the trees a bit to do her business. Again, we're 12 and it's cold and we're afraid of the dark, so she asks me to keep talking to her so she doesn't freak herself out. So we're talking about nothing, and I'm doing that little step dance you do when you're cold, swishing my flashlight around to see if I'd find anything cool. I almost never go to the mountains and wanted to know if there would be any cool plants/animals I'd see in the distance, and I stop myself as my light lands about 13 feet away from me. Dead in my tracks. To this day I don't know what else to describe it as other than that one creepypasta, the rake. I know how childish that sounds, but that's the only comparison in my head. It looked like a freakishly lanky, extremely decrepit, pale, hairless person. I could only see its head, shoulders, and forearms to its fingers that stretched out as if it was crawling down the path. It had long spindly fingers that seemed to sharpen at the end. I really didn't know if I was looking at nails/claws or if its skin just stretched like that. Its head was pointed slightly downward, and I would later figure that it was as if it was trying to avoid the light beam, but I could still see its eyes. Eyes that still make me shiver if I think about it too long. Large, black eyes. I don't know if it was extremely dilated pupils or if its eyes were just black. But it was like the eyes themselves bulged out of its head. I was too scared to shine my light any further, and I could see one of its hands slowly creeping towards me. I was petrified in my spot. I didn't move my light off it once I saw it. I didn't know what to do in the scenario. I wasn't going to just leave this girl there if it actually was something that might have hurt her. I told her to hurry up. She asked why my voice was shaking. I remember saying, I don't want you to freak out. It's probably nothing, I'll tell you when we get back. But when you are done, just tell me. We're going to make a run for the cabin. That really made her move. I felt bad for scaring her, but I myself was terrified. I heard her say done, and I just told her to run. I spun around, finally taking my light off of it, and sprinted so quickly that I caught up to her in seconds. This might have been my own heartbeat pulsing in my ears, but I was so sure I could hear it behind me. We were moving so quickly that we slipped a bit on the leaves in front of our cabin door. I remember two of the other girls waking up when the door slammed behind us as I fumbled with the hook that would lock it. I don't really know how I thought that would help. My friend was freaking out now, asking me what I saw and practically begging me to tell her I was pranking her. I couldn't say anything, though, as I had begun to have one of the worst panic attacks in my life. My breathing became audibly labored, and someone got up to go get our counselor, which is what got me talking again. She got about halfway to the door before I said no. And that was what made everyone more freaked out. Eventually, our counselor heard us and came to our cabin. Someone opened the door for her, and she came in, wanting to know why I was crying so viciously and why everyone was panicked. I was able to piece together a coherent sentence so that she got the gist. Obviously she didn't believe me. Who would? But she finally gave up on trying to convince me when she offered to go with me to confirm there was nothing there, and I only cried harder. I slept in the lean-to with her for the rest of the week. I'll be the first to admit that I can't honestly know what I saw. I was 12, it was dark, and I was tired with an overactive imagination. However, I am aware that gazing into the darkness has never instilled in me a fear quite like that before. I still don't really know what to make of it, but I think about it every summer. So I just thought I'd share it this year. When I was 16, I would sometimes pick up my 9-year-old brother from school. One day, around 3:15 p.m., we took our normal shortcut home through a dirt track. If you're familiar with Maddington in Perth, you'd know the kind of tracks I'm talking about: barren scrubland, sand hills, and bush as dry as can be, with suburban areas still visible around us. It was a hot day, and as we walked, I noticed someone ahead of us. They were tall and wearing a long, dark coat, which felt weird given how hot it was. At first, I didn't think much of it, but as we got closer, something about them felt off. They stopped walking and just stared at us. It made us stop too. For a moment, everything was still. Then, without warning, they crouched down. Suddenly, their bodies seemed to extend upward, springing into the air and growing unnaturally tall, well over 7 feet 5 inches. My brother and I froze in shock. We watched as they repeated this unsettling movement again and again, their bodies elongating and springing high into the air in a way that didn't seem humanly possible. Finally, they crouched one last time and vanished from sight, as if sinking into the ground. Terrified, I grabbed my brother's hand, and we started running. Just as we were about to exit the track, we looked toward a nearby junkyard about 40 meters away. There it was again, this time springing up and down on the tops of the wrecked cars, moving unnaturally fast. We didn't stop to watch. I practically dragged my brother as I legged it the rest of the way home, and once inside, we locked all the doors and tried to catch our breath and just take in what we just saw. To this day, my brother and I remember this event, especially me, right down to the smallest detail. I still wonder, what did we witness that day? Whispers by the lake. This was a few summers ago. My father and I were celebrating me finishing university with a fishing trip to Logan Lake, not the actual lake, just the municipality. I don't think the lake had a name, but it was one of the less popular nearby lakes that was private and that people couldn't get there without clearance. We were the only ones at the lake the whole time. Anyways, we get there. The first day is normal, probably the best fishing we've both ever had in our entire lives, starting around 4 p.m. We were trolling the shallows, clear water, 4 to 6 feet deep, with a pumpkinhead fly and getting a fish every 5 minutes. Generally, this never happens, especially in an area like that, because the fish can see you easily. I think we both landed at least 25 fish each by the end of the day. Super glad we brought the 2 WT rods on this trip. The fish we caught were small, 12 to 16 inches and slim, but they were feisty, and the ones we decided to keep tasted amazing. The second day was more typical fishing for the lake, about 4 fish each over the course of the day. We eat 2 fish each, the limit for the lake, eat some hot dogs, then go to sleep. Around 2 a.m., I wake up feeling very alert. At this point, I'm a bit irritable because I know I won't be able to fall back asleep for a while, or at all, given how I feel. A few seconds later, I feel this primal fear, like I couldn't move even if I wanted to. There's this slow, childlike babbling along the side of the tent. Every instinct in my body is telling me not to speak or make any sound that might make my presence known. In a way, the sound seemed to be an attempt at communication. Not in the sense of telling me to leave, but more like trying to get a point across, like being very insistent. Like a baby becoming frustrated that its cries out of hunger weren't being heeded, or like a cat asking to be fed with meowing. But it sounded unsettling. It's not like it didn't sound like a baby, it's more like it just sounded wrong, like it wasn't from this world. It didn't sound like any language I knew or was familiar with, more like gibberish. But despite the fact it sounded like gibberish, it felt like the words had meaning to the being. Something about the speech patterns, or maybe whatever it was saying, petrified me. The closest comparison I can think of is the Dead Children from the TV series From. It hadn't come out yet, but I remember when I first started watching it, the ghoul children reminded me of the babbling I heard that summer when they said Ankui. Despite being so scared and feeling so alert, I remember completely passing out after the voice stopped, like it put me to sleep. My dad didn't wake up or hear anything, he was wearing earplugs. We stayed another night after that against better judgment, and nothing weird happened. Fishing was average the rest of the time, and we left without further incident. The only other notable thing that happened was that every fish we released on the final day was scooped up by 2 loons. We didn't ever go back there, partly because of my eerie experience, but also partly because I would rather not taint the memory of back-to-back fish with getting skunked. I used to live in western Washington state in the US. It is very woodsy. There is this one stretch of road deep in the Olympic National Forest. It goes around a bend, and then you see up 2 mountainsides packed with trees. On one side of the road, we parked and took a break from driving before walking a short distance into the woods. So I have a strong sixth sense. I've had it since I was a kid. I also have an irrational fear of inbred mountain men, a la the original Wrong Turn and The Hills Have Eyes, etc. So we found a clearing maybe 100 yards on the tree line. It's a roundish clearing. We played for a bit, and then I was going to sneak around the back of a tree in the clearing. On the opposite side of this tree was a symbol, not one I recognized. Thought it was a kid possibly, years ago. But I started looking at the other trees, and they had marks as well. I started to feel a deep fear and a sense that we needed to leave. I'm lucky that my family and friends trust my judgment. But, we had a lot of pushback from my younger brother. He dragged his feet, and I was ushering us all back to the car. He's halfway between the clearing and the car. I was not watching him. I hear running, and he's booking it to the car, screaming, "Go, go." He jumps in and we take off. I look out the rearview mirror to see 2 scrawny men come out of the woods. They looked dirty, and like their faces were crooked. I have driven by that spot 2 more times in later years and never had the inclination to stop again. Strange encounter in the woods. I live near a patch of woods, not far from a few camping sites. There is an old basketball court nearby, stone flooring and 2 rusted hoops that scarcely remain upright. It's pretty busted, but it's still our go-to spot when my friends and I want to hang out. It was a warm day last summer. We headed out to play some basketball, mess around, and just chill. Everything was normal at first, just us ducking around. Then we heard barking. It wasn't loud at first, but it felt off. Like, the pitch kept changing. Sometimes it sounded close, sometimes super far away. Almost like it was moving around fast. My friend shrugged it off as some dog from one of the campsites nearby. I didn't say much. Didn't want to seem weird for being creeped out by a dog. We kept playing. About 10 minutes later, I missed a shot pretty bad, and the ball bounced off deep into the woods. Of course, they made me go grab it since I was the one who messed up. As I walked toward it, something felt off. I couldn't explain why, I just had that tight feeling in my gut. Like I shouldn't be there. The barking kicked in again, this time louder, like it was really close. Still, I didn't want to make a big deal, so I kept going. I bent down to pick up the ball, and that's when it hit me, this sharp pain in my palm out of nowhere. It felt almost as if my body was screaming at me to get out. I grabbed the ball and ran back, hand throbbing like crazy. I told my friends I was done for the day, that my hand hurt too much to play. They asked what happened, but I just said I didn't know. They kept playing, and I sat off to the side, trying to chill out, hoping the pain would go away. After a while, the barking stopped. Things went quiet. Then I realized I had to pee, like really bad. Asked if they wanted to go home yet, but they said no, they were still having fun. So I walked behind the court, deeper into the woods where they couldn't see me, and relieved myself. That's when things got creepy again. I felt like someone was watching me. Not just nearby, right there, like behind a tree or something. It was quiet, too quiet. Then, as I started walking back, the barking started again. This time it was loud, and it honestly felt like it was right behind me. My hands started hurting again, even worse than before. I ran back and told my friends I had to leave, making up some excuse about needing to help my mom. As soon as I got farther from the woods, everything started to feel normal again. Pain faded, and barking stopped. I never really talked about it. Figured no one would believe me, or they'd just laugh it off. But something happened that day, and it still messes with me a little. I don't know what it was. My best guess is a skinwalker. There is a mountain near my home in Oregon where I collect stones. You can find quartz crystals, tourmaline, and even gold on this mountain. It's an old mining area that has abandoned mine shafts and dilapidated old buildings from the 1800s. The roads up this mountain are treacherous. It takes quite a while to get up if you accidentally take the wrong, unmaintained, road. One day my roommate and I decided to go collect stones up there. It was spring, and the weather was great. We hadn't seen signs of other people all day. It was a quiet day in the national forest because the kids were still in school. We made it up the mountain and set up camp. We poked around the area, finding a few crystals here and there, and even though I had been up this mountain many times, something felt off this time. This crude camping area with its makeshift toilet was extremely remote, but I had never felt strange there before. It's as if we were being watched. That feeling you get in your subconscious that you cannot seem to shake. But I did, and we carried on with our day. At around 9 p.m., after preparing a fire and some food, we decided to head to bed. The tent was about 50 feet from the car, and that made me feel comfortable. I have hiked constantly in extremely remote areas for many years and have run into some sketchy situations. It's not comforting when you are scared and hours away from a vehicle on foot. The forest can become overwhelming under those circumstances. But this time was different. We had the car right there, so what could go wrong? I had just about fallen asleep, and my roommate was already out like a light when the noise caught my attention. It sounded like the brush just in the tree line shaking. We were surrounded by forest all around except for a boulder field to the back of our tent up against a massive mountain peak with an amazing rock face. I sat there listening to the bushes shake, wondering what could be out there. It's not unusual to have elk or small animals like opossums come into camp and walk through, but this was something big. What happened next made my blood run cold. I hear the bushes stop shaking, and something takes a step onto the ground. It had a loud step. I know that sounds strange, but that's the best way to describe it. It then proceeds to walk right up to the tent. What made me lose my cool mentally was that it was on 2 legs. I could identify right away that this was not a usual 4-legged creature coming around camp. I lay there as still as I could and listened. All I could hear was heavy breathing. Then it all went quiet. Again I hear the bushes rattle, and it walks up to the tent again. The bizarre part is I never heard it walk back away from the tent. That messed with my head. After a few minutes of silence had passed, I jammed my roommate in the ribs with my elbow and whispered, as uncomfortable making a noise made me feel, for him to listen. Just be quiet and listen. After a few minutes of him looking at me like I had lost my mind, the bushes shook, and then, whatever it was, walked up to the tent again. My roommate's eyes got big, and he whispered, "Oh my God, that's 2 feet." He knew how I felt by the look on my face and didn't even expect a response. We sat there for a good 20 minutes listening to this thing walk up to the tent over and over but never walk away. Then, whatever it was, walked over to the crude bathroom and started shaking it violently. Both of us are now lying up in our sleeping bags, debating in our minds what to do next. After a good 45 minutes of all of this going on, everything got silent, so we sat there for about another 20 minutes, still. Silence. That's when I turned to my roommate and said, "We need to go." I had had well enough by this time. All we had for defense was a small axe in the tent with us, which, looking back, was so very foolish. I grabbed the axe, and I said we're going to book it to the car, get in, and lock the doors. And we did just that. We ripped the tent zipper down as fast as we could without getting it caught and hightailed it right for the car. My roommate turned the car on immediately and turned the headlights on, lighting the entire camping area with our tent in front of it. Nothing. No signs of anything in our limited visual field. My roommate then jumps out of the car, runs up and grabs the tent with everything in it, runs back and throws it all on the back seat, and we take off down the mountain in the pitch black. The entire time, I'm expecting whatever that thing was to come running out at the car. I have camped up in this area a few good times, and I kid you not, it is one of the most beautiful pristine subalpine areas you will ever see. I've had 2 other experiences, though both times we were camping in the car, as I will never sleep in a tent again. The natives used to call this area Skookum Mountain and said it was haunted by the evil god of the woods. The miners had a rough time here. The country was rugged and filled with numerous perils. Something or someone in the woods. This happened a few weeks ago to me and my friend. We live on a college campus in a smaller dorm that is right next to a cemetery and some train tracks. From some of our windows, you can see the cemetery and tracks. They are very close. We often walk along the tracks because they are not active anymore. One night, 4:20 to be exact, my friend and I decided to walk along the tracks and smoke a legal substance I had just gotten, wormwood. It's the same stuff that they use to flavor absinthe and is supposed to give you wacky dreams and a mild relaxed feeling. We also were using one of those shitty legal pens you can buy at any gas station that does get you high. We were trying to get to the train tracks, which were across the street, but ran into a cop, and even though nothing we were doing was illegal, we just didn't want to have to deal with that, so we ended up going on this mile walk trying to find another way to access the tracks. By this time, she was pretty high, and I had taken a few hits of the pen but was feeling nothing. I have a pretty high tolerance, especially for those pen things. Also yes, this is important to the story. We finally found an entrance to the tracks through a hole in the fence of a parking lot very close to our dorm. As we were walking along the dimly lit rows of cars, we saw the entrance to the tracks and how it immediately went into a very dark, densely wooded area with large embankments on either side of the railroad. We paused in the parking lot, now thoroughly sketched out, and were not too sure if it was a good idea to go wandering through this dark tunnel alone. We then saw some people further down the parking lot heading our way and felt better. To our left were the tracks, and to our right was the road. However, a very steep embankment full of dense trees separated us from the road, with a chain-link fence on the other side. Before we could get onto the tracks, we heard something slide down the embankment. We froze and locked eyes on where the noise had come from. The tussling of leaves continued faintly, but by this point we assumed it was a squirrel or some other animal. That was until the rustling grew in volume, and it became apparent this was no animal but a human. It had come down the steep bank and was now at the chain-link fence. We could hear distinct footsteps and rustling that would be impossible for any animal native to the city to make. We backed away quickly from the entrance of the tracks and stared in horror as we both came to the realization this was a person making their way along the fence. We saw the people who had been coming towards us earlier reach where we were standing, thankful someone else was around. They, however, continued to the hole in the fence and crawled through, seeming to not hear the loud thuds and rustling creeping along the fence slowly. Now keep in mind, my friend was high, and I was definitely not sober but not anywhere near a point where I didn't have decent judgment. My friend didn't want to be alone in the parking lot, so she suggested following the people, but said the people were a group of 5 to 6 frat guys in a dark tunnel of trees, so I vetoed that notion. She still wanted to get into the tree so we could finish smoking our wormwood out of the view of the public, but at this point, I was not keen on being anywhere no one could see us. The rustling and footsteps were still louder than ever. We spotted another group of people coming our way. This group too passed us and went through the hole, paying no mind to whoever was lost in the bushes right next to them. We then both had the idea that we possibly were hallucinating this? But none of the substances we were currently on had hard evidence of being able to cause something like this. And we were both hearing it, clear as day. There was someone over there, the chain link was jingling, and there were footsteps. At this point we had been standing there for almost 10 minutes, this noise continuing the entire time. We both came to the conclusion that it was someone just trying to get high in peace like we were, and they dove through the hole and went in the opposite direction the other people had gone, opting to sit on a bridge instead. We could still hear the jingling of the fence behind us and the crunch of dry leaves, but tried to ignore it while keeping an eye out for anyone going through the hole. But we saw nothing. We still couldn't build up the courage to go back that way and ended up wandering around for another hour trying to find our way back to the dorm and avoid whoever had been rummaging around in the leaves for 20 minutes. I know it sounds like an anticlimactic story, but at the time, it was still absolutely terrifying. We went back to that area in the morning, and the hill is steep. The hill is essentially at a 90-degree angle and is completely surrounded by 6-foot chain-link fencing, which makes it very concerning that someone was down there in the first place. Also, nobody else was even slightly alarmed by the commotion. Does anyone have any similar experiences? Or could it provide a possible spoliation that would soothe the mind? Or maybe we really were just hearing things. Something followed me in the bush. I am sharing this story because I believe people will find it interesting, and this may be the only platform that supports my theory about what happened. The thing is, all of this can be explained by mundane things by themselves, but when this many things happen, I don't believe it's normal. I was walking my dog in a small bush track near where I live. Keep in mind I live in a country with no natural predators that are any kind of threat. The most dangerous animal in our country is probably domesticated dogs. It was enjoyable as usual. My dog is incredibly protective, but she's pretty chill otherwise. The sun was shining, birds were tweeting, and there's a small stream that runs down to a small dam in the middle of the forest. As we walked, my dog tried to leave the walking track, but she was on a lead at that point, so I pulled her back, and, I have no idea why, I said, "We don't leave the path, pup." She started growling at what looked to be something in the water, but I pulled her along. A second later all of the light from the sun changed, but I have no idea how or why. It darkened, not a huge amount, as if cloud cover had come over the area. When I looked up through a gap in the trees, there was no cloud cover in the sky, it was blue and clear, but the dimmed light was still predominant in the area. Next I heard heavy movement in the water, and then twigs and branches breaking near me. I scanned the area, it's not dense bush, but saw nothing. As I'm a chaplain, I began to bless and consecrate the area as I walked. The next section of the walk is gravel. I thought I could hear footsteps following me, so I turned to look every few steps and saw no one. I could also suddenly smell a dead animal, which lingered no matter where in the bush I was, and I was suddenly incredibly anxious and felt like I was being watched. Then the path transitioned into a wooden planked walkway, and I continued to hear footsteps behind me. I also continued to pray, and as I walked I heard a loud, very audible, "Enough," from behind me. I spun and did a small Latin spiritual condemnation, "I know," and then continued walking. I went to do a second round of the track, and at the entrance/exit my dog started behaving incredibly strangely. She bit the lead and tugged on it to try and pull me up the stairs of the exit. She tugged and tugged, but I pulled her along and did a second round of the route while continuing to bless. She was randomly growling behind us and into the bush, but I could never seem to see whatever it was. Again, we don't have stalker predators that are any kind of big or threatening in our country. On this second round, the darkened light continued, and I saw the movement of something in the water that looked very large. The problem being that this was a dam far away from the shore, and we don't have any large river creatures where I'm from. Again I condemned it, and again it sounded like I was being followed the whole way around. When I walked out of the bush, the light seemed to normalize, along with my dog. I know a lot of it can seem mundanely explained, but it didn't sit right with me. Anyway, I hope it's dealt with after the blessing. I had a feeling it followed me to my car, but I suppose I'll have to wait and see. Out for a run. I live on an army base, not going to say which one, near an old nuclear transport depot. I like to go running through the woods by the depot because it's a nice gravel and pavement hybrid road with little hills, great for exercise. I had finished my run on Thursday and was walking back to my car. As I was coming down a small hill, I saw one of those spindly bushes that are damn near impossible to break off, really flexible like young lilac. Well, the bush just sort of bends over like someone grabbed the stem and just bent it over and then straightened it back up. I got the distinct impression that something was there, so being the witch that I am, I stepped off the road into the grass and greeted whoever or whatever was there as a friend. It's worth saying that it isn't my first time with weird shit out there. Running at night is extremely hard because of this feeling of being watched. I once tried to run while it was snowing at night and got such an overpowering sense of danger that I stopped short after a quarter mile and ran back to my car. If I walk the woods, I am always respectful and ask permission to enter, as you will immediately get the feeling that you are not alone. When I walk the tracks that parallel a short ways off, there is an obviously strange feeling that emanates from the left and rightward lines. The other day I went in walking and kept asking permission to go deeper, but at a certain point it was like a wall in front of me, I couldn't go on. I got the impression I should leave and not stop or turn around. At first I didn't feel anything unusual as I was walking out, just mild annoyance at having to cut my walk short. As I kept going back, however, I got a stronger and more desperate feeling of being followed, which made me feel like sprinting to safety. As soon as I cleared the woods and got on the tracks, it faded. I'm going back today. The thing in the bushes. I thoroughly enjoy listening to the creepy experiences of other people, and now I know I can tell you my own unexplained story. Here we go. So, a week ago I, 15, was home alone with my brother, 11, and my cousin, 5. The parents went out to attend a musical or something similar, and I was responsible for babysitting my younger brother and cousin for $10. At first everything was alright. My brother and cousin were watching TV in the living room, and I was in the kitchen cooking dinner. We ate the food, and they wanted to go outside to play ball. I agreed to go with my brother and cousin to ensure their safety while they played outside. After 10 minutes I suddenly had the feeling I was being watched, but I am a very paranoid person, so I thought it was just my imagination ducking with my mind. Normally the feeling disappears after a few minutes, but this time it didn't. After 20 minutes, I had enough of that and went on to look around the garden, where my brother and cousin were still playing and having fun. All of a sudden I stopped at a giant bush at the end of the garden. Normally I would just turn round and walk away, but I couldn't. I just stared at it and wasn't able to move one single part of my body. After what felt like an hour, my brother touched my shoulder and asked what I was doing. At this point I was able to move, and as it was already 9 p.m., I quickly got in the house with my brother and cousin to put them to bed. Thereafter, I went to my room to watch some Netflix and eat popcorn, but all of a sudden I heard someone walking from my brother's and cousin's bedroom to the front door. A bit confused, I paused my movie I was watching, Spider-Man: Homecoming for those who want details, and went to the front door. It was wide open, and I could hear the footsteps of someone walking around in the garden. I turned on my phone flashlight and got a baseball bat and went out to look. At the end of the garden, I saw my cousin. He was standing in front of the giant bush and was talking to nobody. I stood there for a few seconds and thought, okay, in what ducking horror movie am I? Then I ran up to my cousin and asked what the hell he was doing at 3 a.m. outside. He just turned to me and pointed at the bush. Elena, he told me to tell you that he wants to play with you. At this point, I am 50% confused and 50% scared as hell. I looked at the bushes, and no shit, I couldn't have made that up. There were 2 red eyes, and I heard a silent giggle coming from their direction. I couldn't believe my eyes, but I grabbed my cousin, ran back to the house with him, and locked the door. Then I put him back to bed, and after he fell asleep, I went to my room to think about the whole situation. After much thinking, I decided to investigate the strange bush situation the next day. Thanks for listening this far. Now we get to the very strange part. Therefore, the next day, my parent took my brother, his friend, and my cousin to the zoo while I stayed home alone. I took this opportunity and went to go investigate the bush. As I walked in the bush's direction, I got that strange feeling again, but I decided to just ignore it and sat down a few feet before it. Then I just looked at it and waited for a life sign, but nothing came. After a few minutes, I decided to just try talking to it, and I did. I asked if somebody/something was in there, and I heard the giggling from last night again. Thereafter, I took a deep breath and asked if it wanted to hurt someone and waited. All of a sudden I could make out the silhouette of what seemed like a head in a big dark hole of the giant bush. I was just about to turn round and run away, but then the thing shook its head as an answer to my question. After what seemed like forever, I said, okay, turned around, and ran inside. I haven't gone out there since because I can't believe what I had seen, and I know it doesn't sound real, but I swear to ducking God I haven't made that up. Maybe there is somebody out there who can give me some advice on what I should do or can relate. Anyways, thanks for listening. Scary camping in Spain. So, about 10 years ago I went on a road trip with my wife and 2 young sons, aged then about 3 and 4. We started in Montpellier, France, and made our way by car down through France and northern Spain, taking a few days in Barcelona before continuing somewhat further south. After a week or so of sightseeing, we ended up in a campsite, which we had pre-booked, by the beach in Tarragona. The campsite consisted of the usual arrive and pitch tent section as well as mobile homes and vans, but on the beach, a little way from the main section, was a row of about 5 safari tents, basically large green safari tents with wooden frames pitched on a wooden base. The tents were situated in a long line and faced the sea about 50 meters directly ahead. Each safari tent had a zipped outer door that opened up to a small interior kitchen/lounge section. Directly ahead were 2 further zipped doors, which led into the 2 bedrooms, which, having young kids, we had turned into 1 bedroom. The whole tent was about 6 by 6 meters. So the family and I settled into our tent, played games, had supper, etc., and went to bed. At what must have been 2 or 3 a.m., I woke up, desperately needing a pee. I recall that it was windy outside, and I could hear the sea, and after procrastinating for quite some time, I realized I would have to venture outside, no loo in the tent. So, I got out of bed and unzipped the flap from the bedroom to the lounge area. I zipped it up to ensure our kids wouldn't escape if they woke up, and then I zipped the main door to the tent and went outside, again zipping up the tent. It must have been a full moon, or nearly full, because I could see the sea in the distance, so I walked towards it, far enough away from the tent that no one would see me or hear me. Once finished, I turned around and headed back to the tent. I climbed the wooden steps and unzipped the first flap, using the light from my iPhone to see. I turned around to zip it shut behind me. I then unzipped the flap to the bedroom, and as I opened the flap, I heard a noise unlike anything I had heard before or since. It was an emission of pure fear coming from the bed, where a terrified man stared back at me. I immediately realized that I had returned to the wrong tent. I recall saying something very English along the lines of terribly sorry. There was a brief moment of panic as I had to unzip the exterior door, realizing that this man was behind me, but I assume he just stayed in bed waiting for me to leave. I walked back to my own tent, next door, and woke my wife to explain what had happened. We both remained awake for a while, half expecting the man to come and find out what had happened, but he never appeared. In the morning, I went to the other tent to explain what had happened, but he had already left. Dead silence in paradise. When we were 7, Mama took my cousin Elle and me over Hounslow Heath for our usual adventures that were common in the summer holidays. Instead of the regular route, we used to love collecting feathers and other natural things that we found to make collages with, or picking fat juicy blackberries off bushes for our gran to make pies with. Mama took us to one of her old haunts as a child called Paradise. Paradise was thought to have been the location of either an old coaching inn or a powder mill and was just a very stark, bare, massive open field with skeletal remains of ancient-looking stones and wood buildings and ancient tree stumps that were scattered throughout the area. Over the years, Paradise had suffered from random arson attacks, and the local council burned the field to prevent it from becoming overgrown and unmanageable. As a result, Paradise appeared more desolate and bleak, with burnt stubble of grass and charred tree stumps scattered throughout, along with a strong and slightly sickly smell of smoke in the air, especially when the wind picked up. The obvious differences between the otherwise lush and green area around Paradise and Paradise itself were clear to Elle and me immediately, and we said aloud at the same time, the burnt place.
I felt uneasy straight away, and looking at Elle, I could tell she did too, although Elle was, and still is, close with her feelings.
When you grow up with someone, you know how they feel about certain things. I was in my wheelchair investigating the ground around me, and Elle was a little distance off. Mama was looking at something else. Suddenly, Elle looked up at me and said, "Shiv, can you hear anything?" I was suddenly struck with the deathly silence of the immediate area. Normally, the heath was alive with the comforting sound of birds, insects, and small animals. It was a constant, like a soundtrack to our play, but there was not a sound, nor, come to mention it, was there any evidence of any living thing. In fact, I couldn't remember seeing any animals or birds since we got to Paradise. I said this to Elle, and we both looked at the sky before continuing to investigate the burnt ground. Looking carefully, I came to the awful realization that the ground was scattered with small animal skeleton bones and skulls, charred and dirty, left over from years of fires. Elle and I looked at each other and said at the same time, "Can we please go now?" Mama looked at us both and laughed. "What's up with you two?" We told her about the unearthly silence and the small animal skeletons. Mama just explained that it was only to be expected from a dead area, but she didn't say much about the silence. She just listened and then said, "Okay, Let's go back. When we got home we told our gran about it, and we talked all night about unnatural silence. Now we are adults, and Elle has children of her own. They ask us about our childhood, and sometimes we share spooky, funny stories with them. However, whenever we both mention paradise, it is always accompanied by a sense of uneasiness. Heard my friends' voices in the night. Possible mimic? As stated in the title, I heard my friends' voices, and they insist they never called my name or uttered anything. 2 days later, I still can't stop hearing it, so here's what happened. Just 2 days ago I was camping at Leavitt Lake, California. If you don't know about this lake, it's a small lake up in the Sierra Nevadas at about 9,000 feet elevation. This lake is only accessible via an unmaintained service road. Meaning, the only way to access this lake is by a high ground clearance 4x4 vehicle. It's about a 1-hour off-road trail to even reach the lake. However, the trailhead is about 1.5 hours west of the Sonora Junction off of the 108. Once you reach the lake, it feels almost like it is in an arena. There's a large rock wall surrounding it and then an open side that looks out over the whole valley. The lake is extremely secluded, with hardly any people present. Now that you understand where this place is, I'd like to mention the camp setup. There are a total of 4 vehicles and 6 individuals present. The list of names is Ethan, Mason, Matt, Brandon, Josh, and me. Mason, Ethan, Brandon, and I all have rooftop tents. Matt and Josh slept in floor tents. The campsite was set up so the 4 vehicles surrounded the fire pit, and then the 2 tents were somewhere in the middle. We arrived Saturday morning, early. Got up to the lake around 11 a.m. We all quickly unpacked and set up the camp. We all ate some lunch and sat in a circle making jokes and such. During this time we were talking about how it's pretty windy and that the night might be pretty cold. I tend to overpack, so I mentioned to both Josh and Matt, who were sleeping in tents, that I have an extra blanket that's super thick. I'm going to keep it in my tent, so if they need it, they can come knock on the tent and I'll give it to them. Fast forward. It's getting late, the fire's going out, and we all decide it's time for bed. It's about 11 p.m. We crawl into our tents, and it feels like within minutes the wind starts picking up. And I mean really picking up. This felt like I was in a hurricane. I could feel my truck shaking pretty good from this. I managed to fall asleep, but around 1:30 a.m. to 2 a.m., I suddenly woke up and heard my friend Matt whispering my name. I've heard this guy whisper my voice. I'm 110% positive I heard this, but it didn't feel right. I didn't see any flashlight or anything. And there was no knocking. I'm awake, and I tell myself, if it's him, he'll say my name again or knock. A couple minutes go by, nothing but super violent wind slapping my tent around. I'm confused and a little scared, but I brush it off. Maybe it's my imagination, and I just woke up from a dream. It takes a minute, but I manage to get myself to nod off again. At about 3 a.m. I'm woken up by this wind. It was like the wind doubled. The rain fly on my tent was slapping so hard I couldn't believe it. As I sat there for about 5 minutes contemplating if I should get out and remove it, I heard my friend Ethan call my name. Not a yell, not a whisper, super calm. Like when we were sitting at the fire and he was trying to get my attention. Just a normal Alec. My heart stops. I don't know why. However, I instinctively knew that my friend would not call my name at 3 a.m. in hurricane force winds, especially not in that manner. I sat there paralyzed. Within a minute I hear my other friend Mason say, "Oh, he's got that shit on." My mind shifts. Something in my head made a connection. The rain fly. Maybe they were both outside attempting to remove their fly and looked over to see mine is still on. Or maybe they heard mine slapping around and were trying to figure out what the noise was. I felt at ease for a second hearing Mason's voice. So I unzipped the window on my tent facing their vehicles. My heart completely stopped. Pitch black, neither one was outside. I quickly zipped my tent again and sat there for a couple seconds. There's no way I heard them. There's just no way. Suddenly my truck moves. This wasn't the wind. The only way to describe this was a raccoon jumping on my truck bed. I have a truck bed cover on under my tent, so there is about 12 of space from the bottom of my tent to the top of the bed cover. It felt like this thing jumped from the rear bumper, under my tent, and then up onto the roof of my truck, and then finally hopped onto the roof of my tent. I could literally see the indent from where it was standing. Then a huge gust of wind came, and it was gone. Vanished. I stayed up the rest of the night. When the sun came up, I immediately got out and confronted the friends. All 3 of them swear they never said my name or spoke. Ethan said he got out in the middle of the night to remove his fly but never said a word. We all packed up and left. Now, 2 days later, I am sharing this on here because I don't know what else to do. I know I heard them. Or their voices at least. But if it wasn't them, what was it? What if I did open my tent thinking it was Matt asking for that blanket? What if I responded to Ethan when he called my name? I just can't stop thinking about it. Personally, I don't subscribe to paranormal activity. However, there used to be a camp outside of Sylvan, North Carolina, on the Tuckasegee River. It had been bought by a lady who'd sold several day care facilities where I lived in the Jacksonville, Florida area. She'd retired there. In the very early 80s I attended a different day care over the summer in Jax, and each year they'd take a small group of kids up to that camp outside of Sylva and use it as a base of operations as they spent the week tubing and sightseeing in the Smokies. One summer I went along. I'm fairly sure the year was 1981. Because we camped along the edge of the river, we'd often tube there for about a mile length of river and walk back to camp, rolling our truck tire inner tubes along an old abandoned asphalt road that nature had been reclaiming over the years. On our last night in camp, we walked along that asphalt road after sundown to the tubing takeout spot on the river and sat around a fire that some kayakers had left smoldering. Other than the smoldering coals, there was no light in the darkness we were sitting in. After a while the adult supervising the trip began to tell us a story. Years ago, on the other side of the river from where we were sitting, there lived an elderly man who owned all the land on that side of the mountain. That mountain land was abandoned and left to nature now, but years ago every day that old man would walk down the mountain from his cabin in the darkness of early morning, crossing railroad tracks obscured from our view by the dense forest, to spend a few hours fishing in the Tuckasegee. One morning, according to the story, the old man was heading down the mountain and, for one reason or another, in the dark did not notice the train heading along the tracks situated up there. Realizing he'd just hit the old man, the conductor stopped the train and walked the length of track back to where he expected to find the old man's remains, but there was no trace of the man. The conductor resumed his travel and alerted authorities. Upon notification, the friends proceeded to the old man's house to search for him. There was no trace of the old man in the cabin, but they noticed his cherished fishing poles were missing, so they went down to the river and were surprised to find the poles stuck in the riverside, baited and cast in the river. Alarmed, the friends took the fishing poles with them and left for town. According to the story, they parked in an unspecified location while running errands. Upon returning to the car, they discovered the fishing poles had vanished. The next time the friends went back to the old man's place, they found the same fishing poles baited and cast into the river in the same spot. As a kid sitting in the pitch-black darkness, it felt spooky to hear that story, especially since we couldn't see the other side of the mountain in front of us, just beyond the rushing rapids of the Tuckasegee, which we could only hear. It was easy to feel vulnerable and goosebumped in that sort of setting. But then the trip supervisor finished the story by saying, "Every so often people around here say they see the ghost of the old man come walking slowly along the railroad tracks in the darkness holding a ghost light that sways back and forth to warn people not to get caught along the tracks, and I'll be ducked if at that exact moment a light didn't appear halfway up that mountain in the pitch black, slowly making its way in a line across the mountain." At some point someone said, "What is that light?" Knowing damn well what that light probably was, and neither child nor adult could say why it had appeared at just that moment if it hadn't been the ghost of that old man. We left immediately. Years later, during one summer in college, I worked as a counselor at that day camp in Jacksonville, and the adult supervisor who had told the story years ago happened to come by for a visit. I was grown then. He didn't recognize me when I said hello. I just had to ask him. How had he managed to coordinate someone being up on those train tracks at that exact time to walk a light along those tracks? And he replied that he hadn't coordinated anything. He'd been convinced all this time he'd seen that old man's ghost. Scary experience at Waterfall walking trail. A few weeks ago my partner and I decided to go for a late drive to this really pretty walking trail on a mountain about 2 hours away from my house. I have visited only a few times, but it is a location frequently frequented by my partner and his family. We left home at midnight, which is a lot later than we normally would, so it was like 2:30 in the morning when we actually got to the trail. I had a weird feeling as soon as I got out of the car, but I get that every time I'm in a bushy area, so I brushed it off. This walking trail twists you through the bush on a dirt path, down a bunch of stairs, to a cave with glowworms, and over a waterfall that eventually loops back around at the end. I stopped at a sign just before you walked into the bush to light a J, and I heard what sounded like someone walking in the bush off the trail. Again, I just brushed it off as being a big lizard or something. However, that eerie feeling was way more intense now. Every few steps down the trail I was turning around to look behind me. It sounded like someone was walking behind us in boots. Anyway, we get to a point in the trail where you can start to see the waterfall, and you have to start walking down the stairs. They also kind of bend a little as you go around the corner. My partner stops in front of me, and as I'm turning around to check behind me, I hear a female voice say stop clear as day in my ear. It was not really a threatening voice, but it sent a cold shiver through my whole body, and I knew something didn't want us there. Before I could say anything, my partner turned around and said we should leave. I agree, and we basically run out of this trail, both of us now checking behind us. As we exited the trail, still running, my partner turned to check behind us one more time and stumbled into me, nearly tripping both of us over in the process. We have never pulled out of there so quick. When we finally felt safe further down the mountain, I told my partner what I heard and asked him if he had heard it too and if that's why he wanted to leave. He said he didn't hear the voice, but he could tell from the sound of the waterfall that the river below it was really high up and probably blocked our path. He did say as he was leaving he heard some weird clicking noises, and that's why he fell into me. I also heard those noises, but at that point I didn't want to look behind me and just wanted to get the duck out of there. After talking to my partner more about it, he told me a few people have died in that river from jumping off the waterfall, and oddly enough, when I heard the first noise, I was reading a sign warning people not to jump from the waterfall to the river and that there was a fine if you were caught swimming in the river. So, that's my story. It was a really weird experience, and we haven't been back to that mountain since. The woods mocked us. This is a long story, split into a few segments, but bear with me. If you guys know what this thing is, please, let me know. So I live in the Midwest of the U.S. South. The street I grew up on wasn't the best neighborhood, but most parents trusted us kids to run wild. And we did. At the end of my block, there was an opening to this really dense wooded area, which was about a mile across both ways on our side of the train tracks. Once you crossed those tracks, it was pretty expansive, I'd have to say at least 3 miles long from the tracks to the east. My friends, my sister, and I always would hike on the smaller side. The woods were always kind of weird. You could go in, and the paths that you just walked yesterday would seem to be missing or turned in ways you didn't expect. There were massive trees fallen all over the place, covered in maggots and spiders, as well as an abundance of nasty trash people had just tossed in there. It was split up the middle, perpendicular to the train tracks, by a knee-deep creek, which ran red near one end because of the soil. You could spend hours in there, just hiking for what seemed like miles, only to come out at one end, near where you started, only 30 minutes having passed. There were no animals. Birds didn't nest in the trees, and there were no lizards or snakes. No stray dogs or cats. No deer, even, which are really common. My sister went camping in a large clearing that no one else can find, even though it's supposedly big enough that we would have seen it on Google Maps. She could take you there, but no one else could seem to find it. 1. This story starts with my sister, let's call her V. V comes home one day with buckets and a duffel bag filled with bones. Big bones. We believe these bones are likely from a deer, as they appear too unusual to be human. These bones were picked absolutely clean. This isn't too big of a note. Like I said, a lot of bugs. But what is weird is that they have holes in them, like someone chewed on them. Now, not having seen any animals in those woods, we're pretty confused. I want to state we are not out in the sticks. This is in the dead center of a moderately sized city. Coyotes usually stick to the cornfields, and we've never seen a dog in those woods. It also makes no sense for a hunter to dump bones there, let alone for anyone to be hunting out of season. It's off-putting, but we don't really feel like it's important. 2.
Sometime later, 5 and 1 are hanging with friends D, J, and G.
We're playing pool in G's basement that night when D and J decide they want to go for a walk. They're gone less than 10 minutes before D runs back in the house, looking frantically for my BB gun. He keeps saying J got lost in the woods, she's missing, and he can't find her. He runs out just as quickly as he came, without the gun. 5 and 1 leave G at his house and go to track down D so we can find J. As we cross the tracks back to the western side, near my street, we see D walking toward us with our friend S, both armed to the teeth with knives and bats. S fills me in, crying. Apparently, D's girlfriend and cousin saw him enter the woods with J, caught them in the act, and J, the cousin, and the girlfriend ran off. So there's actually 3 people missing now.
D, S, and I enter the woods. V keeps watch.
D wanders down a different path, but S and I stick together. We are within shouting distance when we hear D shout. Hey! S! Quit F-king with me, man! S looks confused and shouts back, dude! I am over here with Op, what are, and that's when we hear D scream. And as he flies from the brush near us, a giant black shape of some kind ducks behind him. It's hard to explain how inhumanly it moved. Like a liquid in a glass being tilted. We all run out, panting. D insists he heard laughing and that something grabbed his shirt. I call bullshit and re-enter with S, But we don't get too far before we hear what sounds like if wind chimes could laugh. We just say duck it and leave. As we head back the way we came, this 40-something-year-old, toothless woman pops out of her house. She asks if we're okay, then proceeds to tell us the woods are dangerous, something in there ended a litter of kittens she had, and she found one's paw at the entrance. She leaves pretty quickly, telling us to be careful, when all of us see J, D's GF, and cousin turning the corner. They never were in the woods. 3. A week later, 5 and 1 tell G and our friend A, who were wondering why we left and what happened. 5 and 1 explained to them what happened earlier. They want to go camping now, at 3 a.m., to hunt it. So we do. We find a place by the stream, which is close enough that we can hear cars on the outside street and see lights, but far enough in that no one would hear us being loud. It was well after curfew. We hang for a bit before we hear a voice, sounding like it's on a megaphone. We know you're in there. Come out with your hands up. Of course, at this point, the group doesn't want to be caught by police, so we stamp out the fire and wait again. This is the police. Come out here. Collectively, we decide the best course of action is to follow the river west and out near a bridge so we don't get caught. However, the path is far too muddy, and we realize we aren't getting through that way. We made it back to the campsite, and G and V decided to go scout to see if the cops had left. A and I stay behind, kind of just milling, when A looks at me dead in the eye and tells me we should head up with them. His voice is flat, very quiet, and deathly serious. I turn around, and though it's hard to see, I could swear there was a tree shadow that wasn't there a minute ago. A and I run back up, freaked out when we run into V and G. There were not only no cops, but no disturbance at all. If the cops had come, we deduced, we would have heard the car and seen the lights. People would be on their porches, looking around. Lights would be on in houses. But as we walk back up with them, it's dark. Much darker and quieter than usual. We all turn when we hear laughter again but quickly run to the safety of my house. 4. This last bit is a few weird things that have happened since. I asked S's mom and dad, who grew up in the neighborhood, if they knew anything. Both had weird stories of a massive black shape on the train tracks, a party abandoned early because of loud, heavy footsteps followed by barking dogs being silenced, and hearing voices they could have sworn they knew. They informed me that a mine collapse occurred on the east side of the tracks, which was flooded and so deep that one would drown before reaching the bottom. The mine was confirmed after a trusted adult did research. Apparently, not everyone made it out. My sister took some friends to the woods without informing them beforehand. They all had weird shit happen. One friend claimed he had been licked by a big dog through the tent, only to find the only footprints in the mud in the morning were his and V's from last night. Another one tried to leave at 4 a.m. because she swore she heard her mom calling her, even though her mom had no way of knowing she was in those woods camping. Some local boys claimed they saw another boy crawl out of the river and under a tree. They took a photo prior to seeing this, but since I don't talk to the people who took it anymore, I can't show it to you here. Sure enough, it looked like a face was on the banks. I don't really know what's going on, but I'm terrified of those woods to this day. The closest conclusion anyone can think of is because of the iron in the tracks, it could be ghosts. I personally think it's a hole in our dimension or a singular being. If anyone has any input, help a guy out. I got back to the trailhead in the evening from a backpacking trip with my wife. We camped in a very rural campground that had 0 cars, no houses for miles, and no other occupied sites. I was taking a bucket bath while my wife cooked dinner. I was toweling off when she lit a lantern and cranked it up. At that moment, a shadowy figure wearing a hoodie suddenly appeared about 25 yards away from me. I blurted, "What the duck?" The person took a drag off their cigarette, turned, and walked away into the forest/brush. I grabbed a powerful flashlight and my pistol from my car and tucked it into my belt. I kept my eyes open, and about 10 minutes later I spotted him again, watching from another location, a bit further away. I shouted hello, no response. I shouted again, he just dragged on a cigarette. I turned on my flashlight, spotlighted my pistol so he could see it, then shined the light right at them. It was some scraggly looking dude in a hoodie and sweats holding his hand against the light, just glaring at me. Again, this campsite was 8 to 10 miles from the nearest private property in the middle of a state park, at the end of an access road. There were no other cars in the parking lot or on the access road leading in. He turned and left. I'd how long he was watching us bathe or watching us in general. I'd if he came back or not. I certainly didn't know his intentions, but it was one of the creepiest things I've ever experienced, and I slept next to a loaded gun that night. Our childhood bush house. When we were young, my cousins and I had a bush house at the end of the back garden just before the garden opened up on the heath. Due to me being a full-time wheelchair user from birth, it was Gron's idea that instead of having a treehouse that had to be climbed, it would be safer and more practical to have a bush house that all us kids could use. Even though we protested greatly, although I am disabled, I frequently used to climb trees in the local parks and over the heath. With the help of my cousins, obviously, Gron's word was final, and we never argued with her, as she was a beautiful and lovely matriarch but also as tough as old boots and very scary when pushed. So with that we busied ourselves on choosing an appropriate bush for our new play area. On selecting a perfect one, Gran delegated tasks to the older boys to clear the outer area of the bush and also make somewhat hollow inside it with pieces of spare wood on the ground to serve as a basic floor so that my little wheelchair could run safely and easily inside it. Gran was reasonably young at the time, and while the boys were doing the heavy work, she arranged for us younger ones to get furniture, supplies, and accessories to make our new play space cozy and comfortable for us all. A year later, our bush house was in full use. In the daytime, we younger ones played in it after school and on weekends and holidays, and in the evenings and nights, it was a place where the older cousins could have some privacy away from the eyes of Gran and Mum to do whatever they did. Our bush house was cozy, though. We got chairs, bean bags, and floor cushions donated by relatives and friends of the family. We made a tablecloth for a small table, and Auntie J made curtains that we hung up. We even had a cupboard where we kept snacks, and, only when the older boys or Mum were there, we were allowed to use the camping stove to heat tinned beans and sausages or pot noodles up and make tea. Gron's bingo companion Jean donated a second-hand rug. It was worn and outdated, yet we found it beautiful. It was slap bang in the middle of the summer holidays, probably in early July, when this happened. Elle and I were 7, and G was 11. Our older cousin G's brother A was there earlier but by 3 o'clock had grown tired of hanging around with us and had gone out with his mates. The three of them were coming back later to make us all dinner on the stove. Elle and I were sitting at the table playing Beggar Your Neighbor with a pack of playing cards that we got from the living room cupboard, and G was sitting in the corner of the bush house on a beanbag reading The Secret Garden, for the third time. It was just another normal at-home day. Nothing unusual or odd occurred till around 4, when we all heard a sound that was at odds with the peaceful scene. It was between a growl, an owl's hoot, and a man mumbling. We weren't particularly outdoorsy kids, being born and raised in the outskirts of urban London, but being bright little girls, we all knew that owls are nocturnal creatures and the accompanying sounds that were mixed with the hoots didn't come from the same bird. The weird sounds were joined by a furtive and stealthy rustling coming from the back of the bush house. Actually, it was really near to where G was sitting, and she jumped up, stifling a scream by covering her mouth with her hands. We also saw a dark dog-like size/shape through the dense foliage of the back of the bush house, which incidentally led straight onto the beginning of the heath, as I said earlier. The strangest thing about this figure was that it was very present but rather ethereal, almost as if the figure was attempting to hide intentionally. Also, throughout this period there were no other natural sounds, no birdsong, no insect sounds, and no background human noise. Being right in the center of a council estate, you could always hear people talking, cars revving, and dogs barking, all the regular noises of urban community living, but, at that time, it was as if the entire world had paused and we three were the only ones conscious and present, along with the mysterious figure. We didn't know what to do, but we gathered together, and both G and L took one handle of my wheelchair and pulled me back out of our bush house, not taking our eyes off the translucent figure as we went. When we were free from the bush house and close enough to home for us to feel out of danger and safe, we just looked at each other very doubtfully. We were crapping ourselves. G said suddenly, "Stay here, don't move or speak." She ran to the garden shed and climbed up the side to the manky rotting roof. I completely lost it, letting out a squeal of utter fear. Quick-witted as usual, Elle put her hand over my mouth and hushed me. Elle and I watched while G looked over the hedgerow that divided our back garden from the beginning of the heath. From our position her face was clearly visible. G's expression was a mixture of confusion, surprise, and fright, and her pretty brown eyes looked troubled. We waited for G to come back to us before asking her in earnest what she saw. She didn't answer immediately, but when she finally did, she spoke up. "It was so strange, I didn't see anything, no dogs, no other animals." She paused, her young mind trying to summon the words to explain what she witnessed. "There was a man, I saw the back of him walking away towards the iron fence." My 7-year-old's mind found it hard to comprehend what G was saying, and one look at Elle told me she was experiencing the same. We both said together, "What, man, G? What did he look like?" G sighed, biting her lip, a habit that she still has today when she is anxious, worried, or trying to explain something tricky or difficult. "Lol. I didn't see him properly, his face and all that, I only saw his back. He did have really long, scruffy hair, though. Her eyes wandered nervously to the end of the garden, leading out to the very public heath. Elle and I both followed G's gaze, we all shuddered, nobody spoke for ages. For a long time, G and Elle sat on the back step while I remained in my wheelchair alongside them in silence. Suddenly, I noticed something and exclaimed to the others. Everything is back to normal, listen. We all listened, the regular everyday noises had returned, and the world appeared to have resumed business as usual. A while later, A and his two mates came back, and sensing some tension from us, they asked us what was up. We did tell them everything, and two of them ran out to the back to have a look around. They were gone for about 45 minutes. When they returned, they said they didn't see anything, no strange man, no animals, nothing unusual or dodgy at all. We spent the rest of the day hanging out with the boys, eating dinner in the bush house, and later watching films and eating junk food. We didn't tell Mom about the experience until a few years back, long after we were grown, and we still don't know or can't explain what happened that day. I've lived in the country in the southeast off and on most of my life. Hiked in the Appalachians a fair amount. Hiked Devil's Fork, Paris Mountain, Table Rock, War Woman Dell, and places in Sylvia, North Carolina, Asheville, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Southwest Virginia. One of the places we went every fall when I was a kid was a small town near the foothills of Appalachia called Dillard, Georgia. Never experienced anything paranormal in any place other than Sylvia, North Carolina, on the Tennessee border. We stayed at a place called the Lazy Bear Lodge for my wife's and my 5th wedding anniversary. It was literally so high up the side of the mountain that when you went out on the deck, the clouds were below you and birds were flying all over the place. Super pretty and cool place during the day. The only thing that didn't sit right with me was the basement. It was completely furnished, had a pool table, the works, and a very nice basement. But the door to it was unlocked when we got there. And it didn't lock. We couldn't get it to lock, and the door from the basement to the rest of the cabin wouldn't lock either. So I'm already on high alert from that. Once nighttime hit, it was really nice. Had a hot tub and a grill. Great night, went to sleep. I woke up in the loft, looked over the railing, and can best describe what I saw as dancing lights. There wasn't a light on in that house, but it was lit up like a Christmas tree. The lights moved around, and I guess I woke my wife up because she sat up and saw them too. There must have been 10 or 13 of them, but my wife called them fairy lights. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, but by about sunrise they were all gone, though. The basement there, thinking about it now, still makes the hairs on my neck stand up though. There was something off about that basement. That being said, I've seen shit in the desert in California and Arizona. I can't explain that blows Sylvia of North Carolina out of the water. Appalachia is old, but so are Death Valley and the Grand Canyon / Antelope Canyon, etc. An Australian bush walk experience. This is my first time sharing my experiences here, although I have always enjoyed listening to others' stories. Initially, I listened to people recounting their near misses with murders and home invasions, but then my focus shifted to more paranormal stories. I had always been kind of on the fence about such things. On the one hand, I would be going, how could something like this exist if people do not have definitive proof of it? But on the other hand, I am not naive enough to think there aren't some things out there we don't know about. Furthermore, how could so many people have records of seeing the same things when those people had never met? Still, most of these stories are abroad, mostly in America, it seemed. Australia rarely appears in these tales, and aside from stories about yowies, there doesn't seem to be much support for understanding my experience. Anyway, on to the story. So, I live in a small town inland of the coast of New South Wales. I say in a town, but the house is actually situated a few kilometers out of town. It's the kind of area where you can see your neighbors in the distance, but you would really have to scream bloody murder for them to hear you. A few more kilometers up the road and it turns into a solid bush and national park. The road is an old dirt path lined with trees on both sides, remaining quiet except for a few dirt bike riders who mostly visit on weekends, along with the occasional lost car, 4WD, or person collecting wood. So, for me, it was the perfect place to walk my dogs. On the day in question I was out with my 2 dogs, a Great Dane and a Husky, and my mom's dog, a Scotty Terrier. My Husky likes to misbehave, so to stop her from taking off into the bush at the smell of a kangaroo, she is on an extender leash. My Dane is loyal to the core, so he is off leash, and so is the Scotty. She can be a pain and run off but always comes back. This bush road features what are known as fire roads. I believe they are intended for use if you find yourself caught in a fire in the bush, providing alternative escape routes, but but I am not completely certain. These little beat-up paths are 20 times rougher than the already rough dirt road I walk along. I was heading back towards home at this stage when suddenly all the dogs froze up. For a moment I thought it must have been a roo or wallaby and instinctively grabbed my husky's leash tighter. She always pulled my arm off when she saw or smelled a roo. But they all stood frozen. I could see the fur on my Dane's back on end as they stared ahead towards the fire trail that branched off. For a moment I thought it must have been a person, and they were on edge because they hadn't expected to see someone. But as I actually took the time to look at what the three of them were staring at, I finally saw it, a brown-colored shadow in the thinner area of trees before the dirt track about 15 meters away. Now I walk this road nearly daily, so I knew each damn log in this area, and it wasn't something I had seen before. This was confirmed when the damn thing suddenly shot off and moved. It was fast, like, abnormally fast. The kind of speed you would expect from someone on a motorbike. But there was no motor. In fact, despite my straining my ears, I heard no sound. No cracking of sticks, no rustling of branches. It just took off into the thicker trees after standing there and watching me for a good 10 seconds. I was sure I had to be going mad, but as I looked to the dogs, all their heads were turned, staring in the direction this thing had vanished. It took me another 30 seconds, standing, listening, before I finally managed to move forward towards the spot this thing had been. I had to pass it to get home. As I walked past it, the dogs all acted so strange. My normally brave husky wouldn't approach the spot, instead sniffing at it from a distance before pulling ahead. The Dane made a full circle around the spot, going to the furthest point on the other side of the road, his tail tucked between his legs, and the Scotty followed him, cowering in his shadow. I had never seen them behave this way before. Usually, if there was an animal or scent, they would all rush to sniff it, but they wanted nothing to do with this spot. If it was a person, my Dane would normally go into defense mode and stand guard. So I don't know what this was. Because I walked in this area so often, I became familiar with the sounds that kangaroos, wallabies, birds, snakes, and even feral deer make. But this thing, it moved like it didn't touch the ground. Not a sound. Had the dogs not been there and reacted to the same thing, I would have thought I was insane or imagining it. But the silence of the bush after. It made me feel so not right, and the whole walk back to my home I felt like I was being watched. I kept looking back over my shoulder but would see nothing and hear nothing. As I left the bushy area, I began to feel more at ease, and the dogs began to relax. Honestly, I don't know what I saw that day. There isn't much information available about Australian paranormal phenomena, except for yowies and spirits. However, this figure was too large to be a person. It appeared wide and solid, resembling a bear standing on its hind legs, and it also seemed tall. But clearly there aren't any bears or animals like that in Aus, so. What did I see? What did my dogs see? It freaked them out like I have never seen, and I haven't seen it on my walks again since. Then again, I have made sure to walk with others more. While I felt uncomfortable and nervous, I don't know if I was in danger or if whatever it was curious. I mean, it didn't attack me, though I felt like it followed me for a while. Either way, I certainly won't ever be going there without my dogs. The old barn and the ghost. The incident happened in East Tennessee around 2006 or 2007. A buddy of mine and I were tripping acid and hiking through the woods when we heard this sound like electricity, a lot of electricity, but we had been hiking for days and were in the middle of nowhere on the Appalachian Trail. So we followed the sound and found an overgrown game trail that led to a clearing with an old barn in it. The barn was on a mound of dirt and was the kind with a big open space in the middle. As we got closer, the sound got louder, and we quickly realized the entire dirt mound was covered in mud dauber wasps, thousands of them. I have never seen anything like it. But wait, there's more. As we circled around, we noticed another trail and followed it to a tiny old cabin built by the Boy Scouts like 100 years earlier. There was a little engraving that said as much, and decided to stay there for the night because it was getting late. So we built a fire, and just before dark we heard a noise, and out of the bushes came an old man with 2 of those metal hiking poles. He ended up sitting around the fire for a long while telling us stories about the area, and then, as quickly as he came, he got up, said goodbye, and left in the opposite direction he came from. It was pitch black. The next morning we looked around, and while we could see signs of him walking through, there was obviously no trail. He was just bushwhacking through the mountains. We still call him the ghost of the woods. The creeper disappears into thin air. This happened around 2007, and my girlfriend at the time and I were 18 or 19, about a year out of high school. Due to less than ideal circumstances, we were residing in a 2-bedroom house with my girlfriend's father, who was somewhat burnt out. Regardless, He was a good guy who mostly had his shit together and was kind enough to let his daughter and her loser boyfriend stay with him while we all sorted stuff out. I mention this solely for context, as a household consisting of 2 confident teenagers and a burnout, we were somewhat regarded as the troublemakers of the neighborhood. We neglected our lawn, made loud noises late at night, parked our cars improperly, and left our garbage cans out for several days. As a result, GF's dad had developed a kind of rivalry with the lady in the house across the street. She was a bit of a Karen before we called them Karens and would stick her nose where we didn't think it belonged, so GF's dad would get in weird matches with her, telling her to duck off and mind her own business and whatnot. The lady had 2 daughters, the elder was high school aged, and the younger was between 5 and 7 years old. Despite mom being snooty to us, the daughters were friendly enough. The younger daughter was a bit of a talker and would just tell us about her life in the way big-mouthed little kids do. Additionally, I should mention that all of this took place in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and if you're familiar with the area, you understand what I mean. If you're a native or just lived there for an extended period of time, you're most likely aware that it's a magnet town for weird shit. There are all sorts of conspiracy theories and myths about government weirdness, cults, ghost stories, and high strangeness. I am simply noting that, if you have been there, it is quite likely that you have encountered some unusual phenomena. Anyway, on to the actual story. It was some summer night between July and September. I remember because it was still warm around 11 p.m. The moon was also full or near full because, despite being the dead of night, visibility was pretty good. Combined with the streetlights, it really wasn't very dark out at all. GF and I were getting home late from hanging with some friends. At the time, neither of us drank or did drugs or anything like that, so we were both stone sober. We decided to park in front of Karen's house because she had done something to piss off Dad earlier in the day, and we thought it would be funny to retaliate. GF and I were having some funny conversation as we were getting out of the car, and I was mid-rant. As I was going on, she suddenly hissed my name to shut me up, and I quickly noticed her expression had changed. Her eyes were wide, and she was looking toward Karen's lady's house. She wordlessly signaled, as I wasn't getting what she was doing at first, and I turned to see what had gotten her attention. Standing with his back to us, right in front of the leftmost front window of Karen lady's house, was a man in a long-sleeved jacket and jeans. He was dead still, staring into the window. We were about 10 or 15 feet from him, separated only by the front lawn of the house, but he did not seem to notice or acknowledge us. It did not affect him in the slightest that we had driven up and were talking loudly, nor that we had obviously noticed him. We were particularly disturbed because, to our knowledge, the window the man was staring in was to the youngest daughter's bedroom. The little girl had previously told us, while pointing to that window, "That's my bedroom." We had also joked among ourselves that it was strange for mom to place her youngest daughter in a room at the front of the house. In some ways, seeing this creep stare into her window validated our earlier jokes about the situation. I was a scrawny, cowardly kid, so I had no interest in engaging this weirdo. Instead, GF and I scurried across the street and into our house. Dad was awake, and we wasted no time letting him know what was going on. He stepped out on the porch and confirmed that the guy was still there. While we stood with him, he started yelling across the street. "Hey!" he started, and then, when the creep didn't react, "Hey, ducker!" The guy still didn't even budge, so the three of us watched a few minutes more before we finally decided to call the cops. Dad went to bed, washing his hands of the whole thing because he didn't like the cops and just assumed this would drum up more bad blood between him and the Karen lady. We called the non-emergency police line and explained to the dispatcher the whole situation, that there was some guy staring into the neighbor's house, that we did not recognize him, that we knew the window belonged to the youngest daughter's bedroom, and that he had been there for at the very least 30 minutes now. The dispatcher informed us that she would send the nearest police patrol to the neighborhood as soon as possible and advised us to keep an eye on the creep if we could. We were happy to oblige and just kept watching this guy while we loudly spoke to the police line on the front porch. There was no way this creep couldn't hear us as we described him in the situation to the police. Still, he just stood there motionless. Here's where it gets even more freaky. It was about 10 minutes before a police cruiser turned the corner onto our block. We stayed on the line with the dispatcher the entire time, reaffirming that the man was still there. As the police entered our neighborhood, they turned on a huge spotlight and swept it back and forth across the front of each house on the block. They were very deliberate as they searched, driving only 5 or so miles per hour and slowly scanning the front of each house. When they finally reached Karen's house, the light swept across the front door and moved to the window with the offending creep in front. We thought the cops had found him as the light stopped and hung right on the guy for a good 5 seconds. We watched, very plainly, as the light cast a huge shadow with his silhouette onto the front of the house. As the spotlight hit him, the creep moved for the first time since we first noticed him. His shadow, reacting to the light, turned and started to slowly step to the left. The cops started to move the light again, and when it was off the window, the man was gone. He had not started to run or dodge. He was not fleeing as the light passed him by. His body had just disappeared. It was like the spotlight had erased him off the side of the house. GF and I started freaking out on the phone, yelling at the lady on the other end that the guy had just vanished into thin air. The dispatcher insisted we calm down and describe what had happened. We said the cops had the guy in the spotlight, and he just disappeared. The police car left the block, and the dispatcher said she'd have the officers follow up with us. Now, of course, you could say that we just didn't see the guy as he ran away, but it would be very hard for either of us to miss him fleeing. The way the neighborhood was constructed, each house was packed closely together with high fences in between. Our houses were in the middle of the block, and the creep could only really run east or west across clear front yards or the road. To the immediate left of Karen's house, the direction the man turned before disappearing, was a tall fence with no foothold to easily climb. If he had wanted to jump the fence, he would have had to scurry up or perform some superhuman leap to clear it, which we did not see him do. The neighborhood had no bushes for him to hide in, and really the only thing he could have hidden behind was our car that we had parked in front of the house, but that was in the opposite direction that he had turned when caught by the spotlight. As I said before, visibility was pretty good due to the full moon, street lights, and house lights from Karen's porch. Obviously visibility was not 100%, but I would admit if it was dark enough to just lose him into the night. I assure you that wasn't the case. By our witness, he had seriously just disappeared, dematerialized in that spotlight. The cops came round about 10 minutes later and knocked on our door. The first thing they asked was for us to confirm which house we had seen the creep. We were confused and told them it was the house right across from us and insisted they had the spotlight on the guy for a good 5 seconds. Both officers said they saw nothing and had us point to where the guy was. We walked across the street with them and told them that they definitely had the light on the guy for a significant amount of time and we thought they had seen him. The police were as confused as we were and assured us they didn't see anyone. That night, they knocked on Karen's door to talk to her before returning to speak with us. Apparently, Karen had told the cops that the man was probably the older daughter's boyfriend and that he was probably playing a prank on her. We were flabbergasted and explained that the window the guy was looking in was to the youngest daughter's bedroom and that the whole situation seemed really suspicious. Ultimately, there wasn't much more the cops could do except patrol the area for a while longer before leaving. After all, they hadn't seen anyone suspicious in their search. Suffice to say, the whole event left a very weird taste in our mouths, and we were left completely confused and without answers for the rest of the night. It would be odd enough for a man to be peeping on a little girl at midnight, but his bizarre disappearance left us feeling deeply disturbed well into the next day. And further, we ended up even more pissed off by the Karen who tried to play off some weirdo creeping on her kids as some sort of prank from a boyfriend. We assumed she just didn't want to cooperate because of her feud with us, but come on. We were trying to help her family. I still occasionally talk to my ex-GF, and I'll ask every once in a while if she remembers that night. She says, of course, and I can at least rest assured I didn't hallucinate the whole thing. Roadside echoes in northeastern Wisconsin. This story takes place a few years ago, when I lived in a rural farming community on the Lake Michigan shoreline. Occasionally, when I am having trouble sleeping, I like to drive around for a short while because it helps relax me. One such night, around 3 a.m. or so, I was driving down an extremely narrow, rutted road lined with heavy trees and deep ditches on either side. The trees formed a sort of canopy over the cracked and buckled pavement. The headlights of my Y2K Ford Taurus were the brightest thing out there, and that certainly isn't saying much. Such roads were common in that area, and truthfully, I loved them for their privacy and ambience. I didn't think much of it beyond, it's a little spooky out here, and just kept driving, scanning the deep ditches for deer and looking for interesting things like abandoned houses and barns. I crested a slight elevation and observed an object beside the roadway, but it was not a deer. Slowly coming up on it, I saw what appeared to be a human figure with no lower half. It was basically just a torso, drag itself out of the ditch on the right-hand side and then vanish completely. I immediately conducted what my sister likes to refer to as a 75-point turn to get out of there on that narrow road. I didn't sleep when I got home. A few hours later, at work, I told my boss about what I had seen. He was a farmer and a member of the volunteer fire department, and he usually just smiled indulgently when I approached him with something like that. Frankly, I think the man thought I had a screw loose. Not this time. He paused after I had finished telling my story, looking at me in an odd, squinting way. He asked me again to describe what road I was on, or at least the general area. He had a road map of every back road in the county in his head, so I did my best to explain where I was, approximately. Finally, he looked at me with a troubled expression and told me that when he was a teenager in the late 80s and early 90s, his dad, who was also a volunteer firefighter, responded to a crash in that area. On his way home from late-night fieldwork, a local farmer rolled his tractor down in one of those deep ditches, resulting in his crushing death. My boss, who typically doesn't believe in such things, confirmed to me that he indeed believed me. I never drove on that road again, and I probably wouldn't be able to find it if I tried to go back. But whenever I drive at night, I think of what I saw in the echo of a long-dead man in my headlights. I don't drive around like that so much anymore. Camp attack. So let me tell you a story that still gives me shivers when I think about it. This event occurred approximately 7 years ago. I was around 19 to 20, and I was a scout leader. We had this huge camp in the middle of a forest. The nearest city was a 10 to 15-minute drive. So a secluded area in a forest. So every year in the month of July we would have an international scout camp. We were the hosting country, usually because of the size of our camp. But before these scouts from different countries arrived, we would go to the campsite and start the preparations. We would go around 2 to 3 weeks in advance and start building the tents and cleaning the sites. In the preparation team we had around 20 people. The group consisted of 10 to 12 men, with the remaining members being women. We were all in our late teens or early 20s. I don't know if anyone has been in a scout before, but the first thing every scout does in a camp is that we set up a flag. If any scout from another country manages to steal your country's flag, it's a dishonor, and the entire team would pack up and be sent home. Plus, they can kidnap a team member from different teams. As for fun, but it can keep you hostage for days until you get saved. So it's like a game but a little more intense. We have baseball bats for protecting ourselves. But we can use all below the belt, not for upper body attacks lol. So here is where my creepy story begins. One night our preparation team was done with everything. The other 2 countries from Europe, about 60 people, were set to arrive in the morning. We had nothing to do, so we set up a campfire and started singing and talking. We had our guards, people from the team, set up in different locations. 2 near the flag, 2 near the entrance, and 2 in the jungle facing the river. So we were tired and decided to go to sleep. We would change guards every 2 hours. Each guard had a whistle. If an animal or a person were to come to the camp, they would blow a certain note on a whistle to alarm danger. I was an hour into sleep when I heard a whistle. I came out and saw everyone out. We ran in the direction from which we heard the whistle. One of our teammates claimed they heard 3 white figures running fast in the forest near the set-up tents. We figured that the morning teams arrived early and set up to attack us, take hostages, or steal our flag. We decided to stay awake, and all of us stood as guards. We didn't want to go home before even the fun had begun. So we started watching for signs. We had some people set up in trees. We had some in random places. And we would hear constant whistles and radio sounds. We kept seeing white shadows running fast in the jungle. I and 2 other people decided to check the empty tents and couldn't find anything. Then we heard really loud laughter from a bush near us. It sounded like a woman laughing. So we started laughing too. We thought we found the other scout team near the bush, so we confidently walked to the bush with a flashlight. To our horror there was no one. The next bush, a little bit deeper in the woods a few feet from us, started shaking, and a clear conversation between a few people speaking French in an accent. We could hear them clearly, so we checked that again, nothing. Then we saw a guy in a white t-shirt running fast again in front of us. But his speed was weird. He was running so fast as if he were sliding. This is a forest, you can't run without making a noise, but he was making no noise. He was just sliding. We still looked at this as a joke. We had an adrenaline rush, but it was more excitement to catch them than anything else. These things continued for 2 hours. Constantly we would hear our code whistles from the deep forest, but none of us could figure out who it was or where it came from. We would hear whispers of people speaking French and Armenian, but we couldn't find anyone there. By the way, the arriving teams were from Georgia, the country, not the state, and from Uruguay. We had a few people coming from the US too. So no French teams were there. It was weird. Anyways, after 2 hours of running in the forest in the dark, I got tired. I didn't take this too seriously, so I went back into my tent to sleep. It was me and 2 of my friends, so 3 women. And as soon as I laid down 10 minutes later, I heard a car coming towards us. This area is not designed for regular cars to arrive. None of us or other teams had cars. A bus from the near city would drop us there and pick us up after the camp was over. So no cars. Anyways, I heard a car coming straight towards our tents with high beams on. It was coming so fast, so we were frozen, expecting it to hit us. It was seconds, no time to run. Then it had a stop right in front of our tent. We heard the door open but no footsteps. It just closed again, reversed, and left. I was shaking when it hit me that it's not the other teams. They don't have cars, they were going to fly in and use the bus to get to this location in the morning. We got out, everyone had seen the car. It was a Jeep, apparently. But no one got out of the car. No one saw who they were. We stayed awake all night. We kept seeing these white-shirted men sliding around us. We could hear loud laughter and French whispers all around our camp. There was not one person but at least 20 people who were either messing around with us or had plans to hurt us. In the late morning we had the other teams arrive. Everyone came in, and we had a leaders meeting in the afternoon. It was a protocol to have the leaders of the teams let us know if they had planned an attack that had failed. All the teams said they arrived in the morning, so they were not even in the country at night. Up to this day I have no idea who those people were, I have no idea what they wanted. And I have no idea why they spoke French or what they were trying to do. They never attacked or kidnapped anyone in the team. It was scary when I think of it. At the end of the day this was a campsite in a forest. And forests can be places where cults and crazy people gather. True. So I just had the most intense and honest morning with my best friend. I am unsure how to classify that experience. I know that what I'm about to say will never convey the reality of the experience, it may even sound a bit crazy. So because I'm a moron, I sit at home alone and watch freaky videos online, and I came across Randonautica. If you don't know what it is, go find out. So I'm pumped about this, and I asked my best friend, female, 35, if she wanted to come. She was on vacation this week, so she said sure. She got to my house, and I was, like, really pumped lol. I had been up all night, smoked weed at like 3 a.m., and was kinda loopy and still on an all-nighter. So I'm all excited showing her the info about Randonautica, and she's just like, yay! What if we get killed? My aunt said the same thing. Lol, I was pumped, so I just laughed. I was trying to get her into it. For Randonautica, before you start, you have to concentrate on an intention. Putting out energy into the universe, manifesting whatever your intention is. Which we laughed at, but we did it because if something is worth doing, it's worth doing right. One of the only lessons I remember from my dad, the other was when I was 16 I kind of robbed a place I used to work at, just some punk kids doing stupid shit, change really, and too young and ignorant and privileged enough to not fully understand how much of a shithead thing it was. I got caught, and my dad had to drive me to the police station. On the way he says, no matter what happens to you, don't rat out your friends. Those two lessons have stuck with me through life. Now, a lot of people do negative intentions just because of the stories you find on the internet about them. Death and Satan and shit. But I said our intention would be positive. It would be wealth. Not just money, wealth. Something that would better our lives and bring genuine happiness. So we set off hyper, like when we were in high school. We've been friends since we were 16, best friends. No matter how long it has been, there has never been a time where we see each other and we don't get instantly happy. We're talking, and I said wealth reminds me of high school, when we would skip school and drive out to the model homes, acting like we're interested in buying, even though we were obviously high school students. We'd buy a couple disposable cameras and take pictures in all the rooms, pretending we lived there and just loving life, and we did that quite a few times. But we got talking about that and saying it'd be hilarious if it brought us to model homes. We drive up, and the destination is beside a creek behind the backyard fence line of a row of houses. Model homes and houses under construction. We were freaking out. So we leave the vehicle, and usually it wouldn't matter, but my friend, I'll call her Pa, was driving her mom's vehicle. I start filming and shit. My phone is at like 45%, and hers is at 30%, so we have enough battery for the trip. Pa was really paranoid about the vehicle, but I laughed and said it's directly across the street from construction workers and in a really nice neighborhood and not to worry. We set off. We walked down the street about 100 meters and realized the route it's trying to take us directly cuts through a house, so we have to find our way around. We found a path between two houses that led us behind the fence line. There's a pond and a creek. The path follows along the creek and cuts off and ends abruptly on a tree line. No more paths, just bush and big bare trees. It's super cold out, but we're halfway through a huge joint and have a couple large Timmies, so we're fine. We trudge through bush, and we see a dip down and almost a doorway, leading into the forest down a slope about 7 feet down. We're filming, and Pa says, my phone just died, and at the same time, my phone dies. We look at them, and they both just have the Apple symbol. It was freaky, lol. The whole time I've been hyping us up, but it got freaky. We felt an energy. It was crazy and amazing and honest. I felt 16 again. So we hesitate but carry on. Now I'm old. I feel old. I act old. I haven't gone missioning through bushes and thick forest in years. I used to love going on random adventures through creeks and trees and bushes. And we just made a path. We break through the line of trees and come upon this giant, beautiful, gnarly tree that has these giant branches forking off at the base. The branches are probably 60 inches around. One blocks the way to the left, but our destination was on the other side of that tree. The branch forking to the right hung low to the ground, but there was just enough room that we slid under, like we were 16 again. I'm climbing down the slope, and Amanda screams. I turn around, and she's staring up at this giant white and gray owl. It takes off startled. She was so pumped about that owl, the rest of the day pales in comparison to how happy she was seeing her first owl. I've never seen her so excited about something. Lol. It was sweet and beautiful and real. So we're down, under what looks like a dome. The forest is bare, but it's a ring of trees with the branches reaching over it, about 8 feet at the highest point of the ceiling. Probably 60 feet around, a circle of trees creating a beautiful dome. We were so happy and excited and calm at the same time. There was a dog barking in the distance, and we could hear the creek was about 10 feet away. It felt so tranquil and happy and real. There was a giant mound of compost, which to me can connect to wealth if you think about it. Outside the circle in the distance, I see a white mound. Looks almost like a bag, so we take off through thick bush to get there. Maybe we found our wealth. We had so much energy and excitement. We get to the white mound, and we realize it's just a bleach bottle with no label. Lol. Just behind it was a log with a can of pop sitting on it upright. It looked like someone had left it just then. I laughed and said, we probably just scared off some serial killer. Now this whole time, we couldn't record it because our phones had shut off. Which sucks. Because it was beautiful. And retelling it sounds nuts. So we decide to head back. We get back out to the street, and Pa mentions again we better hurry because she doesn't feel safe where we left the vehicle. And I laugh at her, telling her she's being silly. We look down the street, and beside the car is a dude peering into the windows. So we took off running. And then we started walking again 10 feet later because we're old. All of a sudden we're both aware we're freezing, absolutely freezing. The whole hour we were missioning through the forest, we weren't cold once. We power walk toward the car, and the guy seems to disappear behind it. We get up to it, and he has turned around and is coming back in the direction we're coming. He crosses the street, and he looks freaky. He has a hood tied tight around his head. Probably middle-aged, with big sunglasses on this overcast day. We get back to the vehicle, and it's the first time I realize we're parked at a fork in the road, and in the grass of the fork is a giant ducking jet, propped up, at the entrance to airport property. I thought it was crazy that I hadn't noticed this giant jet when we parked facing it and commented that I'd be horrible in a war. So we get in, and I spill my coffee. We're all excited and talking about all the crazy things, most of which I can't remember. We laugh and freak because it's her mom's car, so I pull out a napkin from my pocket, soak up the coffee, and toss the napkin out. Only because the side of the road we were on was dirt and grass and it was just a tiny biodegradable napkin. I laugh and say, now my DNA is at the scene, because of the coffee I was drinking, so if that guy ends up being a killer, it will be only my DNA hanging around. We laugh and drive off. As we turn around and pull off, we see a cop go by. We keep driving and see a dead cat. Which is sad and freaky. And directly across the street was a church with a huge sign that said Jesus is alive. We laugh nervously at the irony. We're driving, and I realize I have weed in my pocket. So I reach in to grab it. I brought it for her, and I realize it was wrapped in the napkin I had just used to clean up the coffee and threw out the window. I had left not just my DNA behind but my weed too. Instant karma for being an asshole and littering anyways. So we looped back for it. We got back, and it was still there with the weed still in it. Parked facing it as a cop. I wouldn't be surprised if someone called the cops because we were so excited and loud. And we had gone through the forest right behind all these huge, beautiful new homes. And we came out running because that guy was at the car, so we probably looked sus AF. We leave, wondering what to do next. So we decide to go get my hair cut. My hair has been a big secret stress trigger for me because whenever I go to get it cut, I start thinking about the 10 years I'd spent growing it and the fact that at my age, if I cut it, I'll probably never be able to grow it back, and it causes major anxiety, and I chicken out and end up with just a little off the sides, don't touch the top. But we were filled with this brave energy that had us feeling like every positive thing and goal we were thinking about would come to fruition. That was how real this experience had felt, and I thought cutting off my hair was just cutting off 10 years of a lot of intense trauma, and I should just move forward with this new motivation, and having my best friend there sealed the deal, so we went to the salon. On our way we detoured past an old house of hers, which was nice. When we hang out we have 8 million memories that make us laugh. We got there, and I realized I didn't have a mask. Don't worry, my mom prepares for everything. Check that bag in the back. It's like a soft thermal tote bag with a zipper, and sure enough, it had hand wipes, hand sanitizer, and a pack of 100 blue masks. We laugh because that's so her mom. So she waits in the car because of COVID, and I hesitantly enter the store, because of COVID, and she says I can sit down. So I do. I'm all hyper, still crazy excited about the magic I had just felt, and I told the 2 women that were there all about it. Stumbling through the story. And I realized how stupid it sounded. It sounded so fake. Then we found this dome of trees. And our phones turned off at the same time, and there was a giant owl, all white and gray. And a guy creeping at our vehicle, and a dead cat, but it felt so real and magical. Lol, I looked and sounded like a nut job. Like I was making it all up. Lol. They were just nodding, being polite. We hadn't even started my hair yet. So I told them about the anxiety I felt over getting it cut. So she combs it out, grabs some, and says, "Ready?" Yeah, I just wish my friend could be here to see my hair get cut. It sounded silly, but it was a huge moment for me. She can come in, there's only the 2 of us, as long as she has a mask, sanitizes her hands, and distances, it's fine. So I jump up with the smock and run outside and bring her in. And she starts relaying the story, we start reliving it. Now she's telling the same story I was telling, so I didn't look like a nut anymore lol. I felt validated, and they believed her. Lol. My aunt is my best friend and is just one of the many amazing women I have had in my life. Pa, my grandma, my mom, and my 7 sisters. My brother. Vivian. I've been wealthy with love. And although I wanted to shed the 10 years of hair and move forward from the trauma, I wouldn't change a single second of it. Because I'm lucky to be so wealthy. To those who have listened this far, I hope you have some sort of happiness that you can hold forever. Strange happenings at the lake. When I was in college, I worked a couple of odd jobs to help pay the bills. While most of them were mundane, one particular job profoundly affected me. I was working for the City Parks and Lakes Division at a local lake. It was a job that did involve some hard work, cleaning and repairing the boats and motors, but it also had more than enough downtime. My coworkers and I would sit in the shade on the dock and chat when we had no work. When I first started, it was mostly the other guys telling me stories about the lake. Most of them were your run-of-the-mill fisherman stories, but there were a few with a much darker feel. It wasn't long before I started to have my own odd encounters in the park. I split my time working there between the boat dock and working night security in the campgrounds. One night as I was driving the work truck around the lake into the campgrounds, part of my hourly patrol, I saw a pale blue light just above the road, probably 100 feet in front of my truck. As I got close, the light grew in intensity, and then when I was about 30 feet away, it took on a smoky appearance and dissipated in the night sky. That incident was certainly unusual, but it was not in any way frightening. The next 2 incidents during the night shift were definitely more disturbing and physical, leading me to refuse to work the shift anymore. Maybe a month after I saw the floating light, I was driving down the hill from the campground back to the lake when I saw a man run out of the bushes. He was dirty, terrified, and wearing only his underwear. The first thought I had was that he was on drugs. The campground was cheap, so we did get our fair share of homeless drug addicts. I quickly realized that wasn't the case, however. The second he saw my truck, he came running towards me, clearly not looking to hurt me but rather for me to save him. When he was still a few yards away, I was going to open my window to ask what was wrong when suddenly I saw a second person run out of the bushes. This time it was a woman. Her t-shirt was torn and dirty, her legs scratched from running through the bushes without pants on. I was confused, to say the least, but the confusion quickly turned to anxiety when I saw she was carrying a large knife. Obviously this is what the man was running from. He didn't seem to notice her at first, so I motioned to the passenger door, hoping he would get it so we could drive off and call the police before she got too close. As I was motioning to him, that was when he spotted her. He looked me in the eyes, and I could tell he knew he should run to the truck, but I watched as the panic overtook him, and he ran. The woman chased after, both heading across the road down into the brush towards the lake. I drove off to the park ranger station and called the police. I could hear the echoes of the man screaming and the woman's yelling. I talked to the police after they handled the situation. The man had been stabbed, but he would live. I went home, obviously shaken. 2 months after that I was driving the truck through the campground, and I saw what looked like a military-style duffel bag hanging from a tree. The closer I got, the more definition the shape took. By the time I was at the campsite, I already had the police on the phone. I could hear the wife sleeping in the tent, but I decided I would let the police wake her and inform her that her husband had hanged himself. I never worked the night shift again. I thought if I worked strictly during the day on the boat dock, all this would stop. I was wrong. I did work an entire summer without incident, but it was in the winter that it happened. It was a cold winter, by San Diego standards at least. Many times, my shift would start before sunrise, and I had to get the boats ready for all the fishermen arriving in the early morning hours to fish for trout. On one particular morning I got to work around 5 a.m. It was cold, in the mid-30s, with frost still on the ground. I walked straight onto the dock and into the shed we used as a workshop. Most of the mornings the only employees at the park were me, a young woman who worked the concession stand, and a park ranger. Often the park ranger would come down to the dock about 20 minutes into my shift to make sure I had everything I needed. On this morning I was inside the workshop with the door closed and space heater on and was working on a broken motor. I could tell when another person walked onto the dock because it would make the whole dock bob slightly in the water. I felt the dock rise and fall beneath my feet and kept at my work, assuming it was just the ranger. I could tell the footsteps went up to the door, paused for a second, then continued towards the end of the dock. After about 5 minutes without feeling the footsteps return, I opened the door to see what the ranger was up to. I looked to the end of the dock, and no one was there. I assumed I must have mistaken the slight waves of the water for footsteps but noticed the water was smooth as glass and that all the boats were tied up. I took a step out of the shop to get a better look and could hear the crunch of frost under my feet. When I looked down, I noticed that there were 2 sets of footprints. One was mine, going from the shore straight to the shop. The second went past the shop, down the edge of the dock, and stopped. There were no prints going off the dock. I turned and saw the ranger walking towards the dock down the shore. I quit once he got within earshot. Backyard camper tale, Southern NH. It's not deep in the backwoods or anything, however, it was a campout my best friend and I were having about 20 years ago. I have quite a few stories that happened during my 10+ years living in this neighborhood, but this by far was my creepiest encounter. I just copied my comment, so here goes. Hi, I grew up in Southern NH, and I had some fascinating times in East Derry. I grew up on a cul-de-sac with a police captain and a detective as neighbors. During my time there, I witnessed numerous strange occurrences, most of which had a connection to the house itself. I had a type of shadow person. It would take the shape of my family members, and years after moving from that house, my older brother would tell me, whatever it was like you, which brings us to one of my many stories. My best friend lived 5 houses away from me, and her parents owned a pop-up camper. It was located to the side of their porch, which had the door that the family used as a main entrance. Being the young 12 to 14-year-olds we had many sleepovers in it with other kids in the neighborhood. We had a few experiences, and I will tell you which one was the most haunting. This night it was just her and me. We're both girls, and at that age we would bicker over the dumbest things. This night it was her throwing a piece of gum to me and it getting lost between one of the mattresses and the lining of the camper. She wasn't willing to give me another piece, which led to us butting heads. We were bickering back and forth about her giving me another piece when we both went dead quiet. All of a sudden we both heard what sounded like footsteps walking around the camper. Then came the talking. I don't know how to describe it other than it being right there, like a whisper, but still sounding so distant. It was male, and we could not make out what it was saying. It was in another language. We looked at each other with concern, and I remember her taking off her socks. They were fuzzy, new, and mine, so you know we didn't want them to get ruined, and we just made the 15-foot sprint to that side door, inside, and up the stairs to her room while grabbing the house phone on the way. Her parents were drunks, so we didn't wake them. Instead, we did the only rational thing and called my house. My mom ended up driving around the neighborhood 2 times only to call us back and tell us she saw nothing. We were so freaked out that we slept on the floor next to each other. Where we slept was under the window that overlooked her front yard. I'm uncertain of the exact moment we fell asleep, but prior to dozing off, we both recall hearing the sound of raking or digging. This is a story going on almost 20 years ago now. I am to this day still friends with my childhood best friend. If I ever tell this story or the other ones that happened and someone doubts them, I will text her, and she will reply, backing me up every time. A lot of weird stuff takes place in Derry. The cottage. I'm a logical man. This happened in the summer of 2021 at my family's cottage in northern Ontario. The area is pretty remote, not completely cut off, but far enough from other people that you notice how quiet it gets at night. Now, for some backstory, this isn't strange to me. I've been a long-haul trucker for 12 years now, doing seasonal runs through Ontario, Manitoba, and sometimes US border states like Michigan and Minnesota. Many people believe trucking to be a job for rugged, hands-on men, and while these assumptions are typically correct, I find it to be peaceful. I was a typical no-nonsense type of guy straight out of Sudbury, Ontario, and I've been playing hockey longer than I've been on the road. From what I've told you, you can assume someone like me has never believed in haunted crap. Ghosts, demons, all that? Fun for the movies, scaring the shit out of your buds, and those late-night campfire beer talks, but other than that, not for me. I love Halloween. I put it up there with Christmas, as, like the original author, I am a devout Catholic, New Year's, and Easter. What can I say? I'm just a festive guy. I'm used to campfire tales, mythology and folklore, and, of course, horror films and stories. Continuing, I had just parked my Volvo in Thunder Bay after a long haul through Manitoba. Hopped in my ride and started heading south toward the cottage. It was a quiet drive. Roads were mostly empty. Beautiful. I remember checking the dashboard. I pulled into the driveway at 12-something a.m., early in the hour. It was dark, really dark. Cottage lights were on, so at least I wasn't disturbing. I figured everyone was inside, passed out, half drunk, setting up base, or out back by the bonfire or at the dock night fishing. Yes, this is something my friends and I picked up throughout the years. Stupid, but fun. The cottage is peaceful and a quaint building. Nothing beats waking up to a morning cup of joe and heading down to the dock, fishing with your buds, and sitting around the campfire late at night, stargazing and talking about anything and everything. My friends and I are close, and we'd go up there with some occasional family visitors popping by, yet that night when I had entered the cottage, I could tell something had happened. You learn to read the room quickly when you're the kind of guy who spends most nights alone in a cab. Long day, boys, I said as I walked through the door. I brought us some stuff to fix the porch out back. Welcome home, mates. But before I could even drop my bag, my friend moved towards me. He walked straight over and grabbed my shoulder, like he was bracing me for impact. We need to tell you what happened tonight, he said. I thought maybe someone got hurt. A bear? Was someone missing? I thought it was something real. But the story that came out of their mouths? It didn't make sense, and, if I'm going to be honest with you, it sounded like bullshit to me. Now, I come from a locker room, frat-like vibe. I'm used to guys jerking around with each other. It is what guys do. We're men, it's how we are wired. So, I'm standing there, still in my boots, bag in one hand, half expecting one of them to crack a smile and hit me with the punchline. But none of them did. Not one. Eyes bouncing off each other like no one wanted to be the one to repeat it. Eventually, my bud, the same guy who's known me since diapers, the one who doesn't spook easily, sat down, rubbed his face, and said, "Something was out there tonight." I said, "Yeah? Who? The neighbor?" "Cut the bullcrap." "No, man," he replied. "We're being ducking real here, man. Not a bear. Not a moose. Not a person. Not anything I've ever heard before up here." Then again, it is important to note the man speaking has never been hunting, so it is not like he's heard many of the wilderness's vast sounds. Then the rest of them started filling in the blanks. They told me the first strange things began a little before 11 p.m., nearly 2 hours before I arrived. Everything I am about to share occurred in two parts, the earlier events that they informed me about upon my arrival, and then the experiences I had after midnight. One of the guys had gone out to the dock to check on his camera. He's into astrophotography and has been messing around with long exposures and star trails all summer. He said he heard something in the tree line. Like pacing. He initially believed it to be a raccoon or possibly a deer. But then it whistled. Whistled. And it wasn't random. It was a tune. A slow, drawn-out 4-note melody, almost playful. Not natural. It neither resembled a bird's call nor seemed distant. And from there it escalated. The family who had come over allegedly heard knocking, rhythmic and, I quote, intentional coming from different sides of the cottage over minutes. Something then ran across the roof. Then they saw movement, a slender figure, tall and still, standing just inside the tree line. Now listen, I've hunted. I've tracked deer, bear, and even the occasional wolf when I'm out near the Manitoba edge. I know the bush. I know what animals look like in low light. I've seen shapes move that turn out to be stumps and stumps that turn out to be shapes. So to me, it could have been anything. It was probably a tree or, hell, maybe their imagination. At this point, I stood there thinking, what kind of drugs did you guys take while I was gone? But I looked at their faces. Nobody was joking, unless their actors were straight out of Hollywood and on par with Brad Pitt and Tom Hanks. Nobody even looked drunk anymore. Whatever happened, it rattled them. And that's what made me pay attention. I've seen men after ATV crashes, hockey hits, fights, all of it, luckily, all of whom are still alive and well. I've seen men make close calls on ice roads, and after waking up and knocking, it turns out to be someone trying to break into their cab. This had that same look, adrenaline, confusion, and that tightness you get when your brain hasn't caught up with what the duck's going on. Again, pardon my French. I asked, all right, where was it last seen? They pointed out toward the tree line behind the cottage, a spot just beyond the fire pit, past where the ground starts to dip before the bush thickens. There used to be an old path there that goes maybe half a click into the woods before it breaks off in a few directions, some leading toward Crown Land, others to the lake's edge. With runoff and debris, it isn't the safest to go dirt biking on, so it has rarely been used. It is mainly shrubbery now. So I told them I was going to take a look. Not because I expected to find anything, but because I needed to show them it was probably just an animal. Or a shadow. Or their minds playing tricks in the dark, because, let's be honest, most people's minds would, eventually, start shitting around with them if this were to be going on. Don't be stupid, my other friend said. You didn't see it. No, I replied, but I've seen enough dumb things to know this ain't it. I grabbed a flashlight from my bag, a mag light, a solid metal one, and slipped my boots back on. I stepped off the deck, into the grass, toward the woods. It was dead silent. No breeze. Just the distant lapping of lake water and my footsteps on the grass. I'm no poet, so I won't exaggerate this. The weird part? No bugs. No frogs. No foxes. You spend enough time outdoors, and your body learns to clock the normal background noise, and when it's not there, it feels like pressure in your ears. I got maybe 30 feet in before stopping. Shone the light around. Trees. Rocks. Nothing unusual. Then I saw it. Not the figure. Not a person. Just a patch of forest that didn't feel right. It is honestly tremendously hard to explain this without sounding like I've joined the Ghost Believer Club, but if you've ever walked into a room where people were just fighting, even if they stopped talking, you can feel it. Like static on a TV. Like the air is holding a grudge and someone is just waiting to explode in anger? That's what it was. Like the woods was waiting. I stayed there a minute, maybe less, then slowly backed out. Something was off. I didn't hear anything, didn't see anything, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing tall like antennae. When I got back inside, nobody said anything at first. Just stared. I said, didn't see anything. Someone replied, that doesn't mean it's not there. I didn't argue. I didn't want to admit it, but part of me agreed. After I came back in, I poured myself a glass of rye. Just a finger or two to take the edge off. I was starting to feel something, it felt off. I know horror writers use this word willy-nilly, but there is truly no other way to transcribe it into words. I'm no English major, but the one word I'd use would be trepidation. I stood by the kitchen window, looking out toward the bush. The moon was high, the sky was clear, and everything looked normal. Still, that damn feeling, like something was out there, watching. Trepidation. Nobody wanted to talk after that. A few of the younger family members went to bed early. It was late, and they were tired. Some of the guys stayed up, but the energy had shifted. Do you know how that happens? One moment you're buzzing, then it's like a switch flipped, and everyone's just quiet. Not solemn, not sad. Just alert. I sat on the couch, boots still on, half watching the fire crackle in the hearth while my buds scrolled through photos on their phone. The guy with the camera on the dock, let's call him Navy, was trying to go through his astrophotography shots. About half an hour goes by. It's just past 1 a.m. Everyone's sort of settled, but nobody's fully relaxed, it's easy to tell. It's just Navy and me in the living room. And then we hear it. Tap. 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 3 slow knocks. Not hard, but heavy. It sounded like someone was knocking with the side of their fist against solid wood. Came from the far side of the cottage, the wall by the spare bedroom, facing an adjacent bush. We all froze. Then again, tap. 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 Same rhythm. Same weight. Intention. I looked at the Navy. He looked at me. Probably just an animal, he whispered. A raccoon. I stood up. You ever hear a raccoon knock like a ducking contractor? I muttered, grabbing the flashlight again. I remember this line vividly. This time, I didn't go outside. I walked room to room inside the cottage, slowly, flashlight in one hand, glass in the other. Nothing at the back windows. Nothing out of place. No movement. No sound. Then, as I passed the bathroom and went into the small dining room, I caught it, just for a second, a shape, crouched at the edge of the woods. Not moving. Not walking. Not standing. Crouching. Like a man. Only it was wrong. Too tall. Too thin. Arms too long. No detail, just a silhouette backlit by the moon. The way it was positioned made no sense, dead center in the tree line, like it wanted to be seen but was in a position meant for low visibility. I stared. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just stood there, locked in place, eyes fixed on that goddamn shape. It wasn't natural. Not the way it crouched, low, like a man hiding, but not right. Knees too bent, elbows poking up too far, like it hadn't figured out how to make the position human yet. There was no motion, nothing twitching or swaying in the wind. It was just still, like a statue someone forgot to carve a detail into. I didn't even realize it until later, but the ducking thing had sweat dribbling down like I'd just pulled it from the fridge. I kept thinking it would move. That it would twitch, shift its weight, or move a finger, anything. But it didn't. It just crouched there, all shadow and sharp edges. The moonlight caught just enough to outline its shape against the trees, a single, dark cutout against the silver-gray sky. I couldn't make out any face or clear features, only that its build looked too long in the arms and legs to be normal. I couldn't see eyes, I couldn't even tell you if it was looking at me. But I knew it was. Have you ever felt someone staring at you when you're driving? For example, when you are stopped at a traffic light, do you ever sense that the man in the truck next to you is staring at your cab? That's what this felt like, but worse. I leaned closer to the window. Not pressing against it, just enough to cut the glare. Still there. Still crouched. Still wrong. And then, this part I remember as clear as if it were this morning, I watched its head tilt. Not fast. Not like it had heard something. No, it was slow. Deliberate. Like it was acknowledging me. It appeared to be aware of my presence. I backed away from the window. Now, I'm not a coward. I've stared down moose in rut season and once had a bear come nose deep into my cab when I left food on the dashboard. But this? This was different. There was no adrenaline kick, no fight or flight moment. Just this slow, crawling dread. Like cold water rising up your spine. I turned back toward Navy. He hadn't seen it, he was still scrolling through his damn photos, unaware I was practically white in the face. I opened my mouth to say something but stopped. What was I going to tell him? Hey, bud, a shadow man is crouching in the trees like a goddamn praying mantis. He'd laugh. Or worse, he'd go look. And I didn't want him to look. Not anymore. The last thing I need is to make our position more well known. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. What the hell was this guy doing, standing around sipping rye and tossing logs like it's just another Tuesday night? Trust me, I've asked myself the same thing a dozen times since. Maybe it was shock, maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe that ducking thing out there rattled something loose in me. But when you've driven ice roads in whiteouts and wrenched axles back into place on the side of the Trans-Canada at 3 a.m. with a dark forest to your back, you don't exactly default to panic. You keep your hands moving. You act like you're in control even when you're not. Maybe that's how I spiral. Maybe that's the flaw in my wiring. I stared at the thing for another 2 minutes or so, then went to the living room, and I downed the rest of my rye, walked over to the fireplace, and tossed another log on. Had to keep my hands busy, the heat helped. Gave me something to focus on that wasn't what was happening. Later that night, between long silences, Navy told me about something Cadet, the original author, had heard earlier in the evening, before I even got there. For those who do not know, the others had heard a jaunty and mechanical sound mixed with bursts of high-pitched laughter. It wasn't the joyous kind of laughter you'd hear at a carnival or when you're hanging with your friend who has had one too many drinks, it was distorted. It sounded like an old record being played backward. The sound was distant, somewhere beyond the tree line, but unmistakable. Look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I was still playing the tough guy. I wasn't. You want to know the truth? I was scared. I'm scared. I'm not ashamed to say it. And if you want to judge me for it, go ahead. You weren't there. You didn't hear that shit. You didn't see their faces. You didn't feel that pressure in the air, like something was winding tighter and tighter around the whole cottage. I'm a grown man. I've done night hauls through whiteout snow on the 17 with nothing but a CB radio and my instincts. I've seen two moose lock horns on the side of the Trans-Canada at 2 in the morning and swerved my rig between them like I was threading a damn needle. I've pulled a buddy out of a flipped ATV, 30 minutes from the nearest cell signal. None of that had me feeling like this. This, whatever this was, had a shape to it. A presence. It wasn't just fear. It was like being a kid again and waking up to your bedroom door half open when you know you shut it. And I knew that thing in the woods? It wasn't done. I moved seats and sat at the window for what felt like an hour. Could have been 10 minutes, could have been 3 hours. I don't know. I just know I kept staring at that tree line, and the longer I looked, the more my mind started filling in gaps. I wanted to see something there. "Are you good?" Navy asked me. I told him I was fine. I could sense it in the depths of my being. We weren't out of it. I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. Navy and I stayed in the main room. Kept the fire going, kept one light on, and no one said it, but we all understood that nobody was going to bed alone. We're grown men. But that night? That night, the dark felt shared, like we were all standing on the edge of something watching us back. I'm a logical man. Eventually, the fire dimmed low, and the room sank back into half-light. I stood there, hands on the mantel, not looking at anyone. Just listening. Watching the way the flames twisted and cracked. My mind repeatedly circled the same question: what precisely are we confronting? And look, I know how this all sounds. I know how internet works. People are drawn to stories that build to a dramatic climax, a revelation, or a moment of suspense that concludes abruptly. But this isn't that. This is a room with two grown men, dead quiet, pretending they don't keep glancing toward the windows. This describes a person similar to me, blue-collar, raised Catholic, and accustomed to northern winters, who suddenly realizes he cannot explain something and, even worse, cannot dismiss it either. Maybe an hour later, I woke up to boots crunching gravel. That's what pulled me out of whatever half-sleep I'd drifted into. At first, I figured one of the guys stepped out to piss. But then I realized something strange: none of the doors had opened. No creaking hinges, no screen door slam. Only the sound of slow, deliberate steps was heard outside the window, near the edge of the gravel and grass where the firewood pile is stacked. I held my breath. Navy turned his head just slightly toward me. His eyes were open. Locked. We both heard it. Another step. Then nothing. The silence that followed the steps was more unsettling than the steps themselves. Like something knew it had our attention and didn't need to do anything more. Eventually, the sound stopped. I saw it in the window. Tall. Still. Watching. It looked like a man. Too rigid, tall, slender, and skinny, with jaunty elbows and long arms. It was like a motionless puppet, but then it ran, with its limbs and elbows mechanically swaying, almost like it thought this all was a joke. My gut flipped. I shouted for people to wake up, and I sprinted to grab my boots. Against my better judgment, I stepped outside. Part of me wanted it gone, wanted to force whoever, or whatever, it was to leave, and the only way I knew to do that was to confront it. My boots crunched on gravel as I pushed forward into the dark. I was just chasing. Chasing what, exactly? I couldn't tell you. The dark swallowed everything. It was gone. I screamed into the forest. I shouted everything from casting Jesus Christ to threatening whoever the duck was outside. I stood out there for a long time. Panting. No wind. No bugs. No forest sounds. Nothing. Like the night itself was holding its breath. Eventually, I went back inside. Lock every door. Shut every curtain but the one by my seat. Truth is, I was scared. This fear wasn't due to irrational thoughts or a fear of the unknown. I am a logical man. But scared that I'd seen it. And that it saw me back. I'm heading back up soon. Same cottage. Same dock. Same forest. This time, I'll be alone. We'll see what happens.